Come on.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Black Brain Trust. This is episode 131, Geopolitics. I'm here with my co-facilitator, Lionel.
Hello, everyone. How y'all doing today? How you doing today, Mike?
I'm good, brother. Yourself?
I am well.
For those of you who want to follow along, the docket is in the description beneath the video, and hit the thumbs up button as you come in, and we will get started. Share my screen. Okay, first item on the docket. This one is from Reuters.com. Where do the Kurds fit into Syria's war? The future of Kurdish-led areas of the northern eastern Syria has been thrown into doubt by President Donald Trump's decision to withdraw U.S. troops who have helped to secure the region. Amounting to about 1/4 of Syria, the area is the largest chunk of territory still outside of the control of President Bashar al-Assad, who is backed by Russia and Iran. Trump said on Wednesday the United States would withdraw slowly over a period of time and would protect the U.S.-backed Kurdish fighters as Washington withdraws troops, but without giving a timetable. Syrian Kurdish leaders fear Turkey will use the withdrawal as an opportunity to launch an assault. As a result, they are in contact with Moscow and Damascus in the hope of agreeing arrangements to protect the region from Turkey while also aiming to safeguard their political gains. The main Syrian Kurdish faction, the Democratic Union Party, PYD, began to establish a foothold in the north early in the war as government forces withdrew to put down an anti-Assad uprising elsewhere. An affiliated militia, the People's Protection Units, YPG, secured the region. Early in the conflict, their control was concentrated in three predominantly Kurdish regions home to roughly 2 million Kurds. Kurdish-led governing bodies were set up. The area of the YPG influence expanded as the YPG allied with U.S.-led coalition against the Islamic State, becoming the spearhead of a multi-ethnic militia, the Syrian Democratic Forces. Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, influence widening to Manbij and Raqqa as IS, Islamic State, was defeated in both. It has also reached deep into the Deir ez-Zor, where the SDF is still fighting IS. Kurdish leaders say their aim is regional autonomy within a decentralized area, not independence. Why does Turkey view them as a threat? The PYD is heavily influenced by the ideas of Kurdish leader Abdullah Öcalan, a founding member of the Kurdish Workers' Party, PKK, which has waged a 34-year insurgency in Turkey for Kurdish political and cultural rights. Öcalan has been in jail since 1999 in Turkey. He is convicted of treason. The PKK is designated as a terrorist organization by Turkey, the United States, and the European Union. Turkey says the PKK is indistinguishable from PYD and YPG. I'm not going to read this whole thing. If you guys want to read it, it's such an interesting article. But I wanted to highlight one area that I thought was interesting. Oh, right here. Okay. Early in the conflict, their control was concentrated in three predominantly Kurdish home regions to roughly 2 million Kurds. Kurdish-led governing bodies were set up. This is something that Black people don't really do when it comes to politics in this country. We don't set up, political bodies to represent our best interests, which is exactly what the Kurds do here. And reading this, reading this over, it says right here, the main Syrian Kurdish faction, the Democratic Union Party (PYD), began to establish a foothold in the north early in the government, and early in the war, as the government forces withdrew to put down anti-Assad uprisings elsewhere. An affiliated militia, the People's Protection Unit (YPG), secured the region. So the PYG, or the YPG, is the military wing of the political party PYD, and the PKK. The PKK, which is the Kurdish Workers' Party, it's a trans-unionist party, is listed as a terrorist organization, but they have political bodies in place to address all of their concerns, and they have a military aspect to them as well. I know you have anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, as far as the article, I saw that I saw the political moves as I read the article, how Syria doesn't want to have a faction in Syria, such as the Kurds, but at the same time, they have a common enemy in Turkey, um, backing insurgents in Syria. Am I right by saying that?
Yes.
So it seems like, okay, we'll fight against you, against our common enemy, but we won't support you in having your own faction in this country. So I see the politics and all of this,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, you have to fight the insurgents because you want to get rid of them, but at the same time you want your own land. So yeah, I uh, I understand that now. I agree with you in what you said. That's what Black Americans don't. What they're doing, have their own political wing and their own military wing. I agree. That's something we should look at in what they're doing, politicizing themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they want what they've been trying to do, at least in this war, backed by the United States and Israel, is to create a Kurdish state in the northern part of Syria, which is what's driving Turkey's foreign policy into Syria. The only problem is that the Syrian constitution, does not allow for a breakup of the state or secession. So similar to like in the United States, California and Texas can't break off from the rest of the federated body. Um, Syria can't be broken up on the interests of Kurdish independence. It's not going to happen. So the Kurds are a large population, largest population next to Black people, without their own ethno state.
Okay. Yeah, that's something we too can, both Kurds and the Black Americans can look at each other and say, hey, we what's what I'm looking for? We view you as we recognize you as a state, and they recognize us as a state. It is a way to have world stage political um, togetherness in
Mm-hmm.
terms of the two.
Mm-hmm. And it's not just men fighting; it's women fighting on the front line too. I mean, there's recent videos of female snipers on the front line. Picking off Turkish and Islamic State fighters, and
Mm.
they're very accurate.
Yeah, I saw that video. You sent me a video a while ago where they were talking about the women branch of their military, and a lot of the women commanders, they have prices on their heads
Mm-hmm.
because of the good work they're doing. But let me throw this at you: America is backing the Kurds, right?
Yes.
What if, well, huh?
No, I said Russia is too.
Now, as far as America, in a perfect well, yeah, in a perfect world, America's backing the Kurds, but then Black Americans in America become politicized, and then the Kurds recognize us. What would happen with that America Kurdish relationships when the Kurds recognize Black Americans as an ethno state without their own state?
Oh, that's a little different. Um, the Kurds don't have a seat at the United Nations. So it's a big
Mm,
difference. Um, Black people don't really have a place at the United Nations either, right? So, I mean, because we don't have our own independent country, and that's not going to happen here. Um, although I think Marcus Garvey was probably the closest thing um, to forming a sort of a sort of political body, a sort of political socio-political body for Black people, right? Um,
mm,
so you would have to join something else like an African Union and get that recognition.
okay,
You would have to go through a different agency or mechanism.
okay, gotcha, gotcha.
Let me jump to the next article.
Hey, how you doing, Paul Bryant?
What's going on, James?
Hey, what's going on, brother? Let me read this article real quick. This one is from abcnews.go.com. Marine Corps integrates male and female platoons during boot camp for the first time. For the first time in history, the Marine Corps will integrate female and male platoons during boot camp. Unlike the other services, the Marine Corps has not fully integrated women and men during recruit training. Instead, the recruit depot, Paris Island and South Carolina, the first three battalions are all male, while the 4th Battalion is all female. Quote, on January 5th, 2019, 3rd Recruit Training Battalion aboard Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Paris Island, will start their training cycle with one female platoon and five male platoons. The Marine Corps said in a statement Friday, first reported by ABC. While the change is not permanent, a Marine Corps spokesman told ABC News that the service will, quote, that the service, quote, will certainly look at how the company performs in this model as we continually evaluate how we make Marines. The Marine Corps, which has the lowest percentage of women among the services at just 9%, decided to incorporate the 50 female recruits into the historically all-male battalion because the recruiting classes are typically much smaller in the winter months. The integration allowed Paris Island to not activate 4th Recruit Training Battalion staff for a single female platoon. That's just a Google Earth a map of South Carolina. Interesting that they have a black female as one of the first women in line, huh? The decision was made by Marine Corps leadership in support of training efficiency and is first in the history of Marine Corps recruit training. The statement said the female recruits will still be led by female drill instructors, but will live in the barracks co-inhabited by male counterparts. Quote, this training cycle of 300 recruits will provide Recruit Depot staff a unique opportunity to assess outcomes, achievements, and challenges in training, logistics, and resource impacts of this company training model, the Marine Corps said. What do you think about this, Lionel? You're an ex-military guy.
Okay, I for people that are listening to this, they're not saying integrate in on the ground military operation. They're saying in boot camp. But you could also look at this as a canary in the coal mine. If they're doing this, then the next logical step is integrating women in hand-to-hand combat, military warfare, because the Marines is an on-the-ground, hand-to-hand combat um, military branch, Department of the Navy. When you're fighting an enemy that don't have a significant, well, when you're, let's say, when you're fighting an enemy that don't have women on their combat forces, and you have a high number of women in your combat forces, although these women a lot of times are more going are will go to areas of the army and the marines that are not on the ground fighting, such as medics or yeomen pushing papers. But if they start to be integrated in those fighting areas, then in my opinion, that's gonna make your military weaker. You know, uh, women cannot women cannot bear the stress levels of military confrontation like men.
Mm-hmm.
Reason that's why men have been fighting these worlds wars for thousands of years, and why the current militaries across the world mainly have men. So if they take that next logical step in integrating these women on front lines, then that's going to make your military weaker.
Mm-hmm. Paul Bryant.
Well, in no clear and uncertain terms, I am 100% against this. All right. Uh, Even the state of Israel, which has compulsory military service for every single Israeli citizen, male and female, women are not allowed in frontline combat units. In the United States military, women are not allowed to fight in frontline combat units, um, including the Marines. Historically, the women train separately from the men. The women serve in all female units. The United States Marine Corps during the war in Afghanistan instituted its first female combat unit. They serve in the rear. Now, my brother is an ex Marine. He was a Force Recon Scout Sniper, Special Forces. And what he told me was the Marine Corps has a saying women belong in the rear with the gear. They feel that women serving alongside men in combat reduces unit morale, unit cohesion, because women do not belong in combat. My brother also told me, never made the news for obvious reasons during the Gulf War, which he served, that there were women, that men were literally breaking their pockets. Women were selling tail left, front, and center because there were no women around. They were the few women, so they were making money hand over fist, just straight up prostituting themselves. Now, this is what you want in frontline combat units. All I can say is that I think this potentially, if the goal is to have women serve in frontline combat units, that is a historically, epically bad idea. Integrating women and men to train together, to me, is pointless if you're not going to have them serve in frontline combat units. I don't see the purpose for it. I don't see the reason for it. I don't see the logic for it. You know, women can call me sexist or toxic masculine or any of that other nonsense, but as Lionel said, since the dawn of time, men on this planet fight wars, women do not. So I don't see the purpose to this. I can't see any positive reason for it at all.
Now, historically, if we want to look at the Soviet, the Red Army, women played a strategic role in the Red Army, sniping, being snipers. Before there was radar, there were women who were on the front line listening with with their heirs because I guess according to Russian scientists, they women women's ears are have can listen to a higher frequency than men's ears. Supposedly, this is what they figured out,
Mhm.
and so they were able to hear raids from the Luftwaffe and things of that nature. Now, you don't really hear too much about Russia having problem with integrating women into their military because they've been there for almost 100 years, right, or even more than that. Um, Even as far as back as like African tribes have always had women, fighting on the front line as well, going back thousands of years.
Really, because I'm not saying you're wrong. All I'm saying is I've never heard that. I'm unaware of that.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, in Ethiopia, they were the ones who drove out. The women actually drove out some of the colonialists.
Okay, I will absolutely research that because I am unaware of that. And I'll say this, just not to disagree with what you said, but just counterpoint. Being a sniper, technically is of course front line combat, obviously,
Mhm.
but it's not being in a foxhole. It's not clearing houses. It's not clearing rooms. It's not. I don't. Every man who I've spoken to, from the Marine Corps, for the fellow ex forces members who my brother served with in the Marine Corps, Army, definitely in the Navy. Well, Navy's a little different because they don't actually fight; they serve on ships. But Army and the Navy, every man I've ever spoken to a man, they say, yeah, women are nice. They're nice to look at, but they would not want to have them. They wouldn't trust their lives to them. They don't want to be in a foxhole under fire during contact, during an engagement, knowing that that's who they have to potentially put their life in their hands. So I don't know, Mike. I personally, I'm against it. I don't think it's a good idea, but I'm open minded. Time may prove differently, but there was always the idea that in this day and age, how would a nation feel about seeing women on the front lines dying? How would they feel about having women POWs? Because we've never seen that.
Mhm.
So how would a nation respond to that?
Oh, I was just saying. I'm not saying I was an advocate for it. I'm just kind of bringing some context to
Right, right.
past militaries. And we just talked about the YPG in Syria, and they do have, I think, 23,000 women soldiers in their military or
Hmm.
their paramilitary, and
Hmm.
fighting alongside with men.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, yeah. No,
Now, now
I'm
I
sorry.
would say, go ahead, Paul.
No, no, no. I'm not lying. Go ahead.
Now, integrating, hello, integrating these combat forces
Hmm.
in American point of view really has a lot more to do with equality than in these Kurdish factions where they're fighting for their country in terms of being recognized, their
Their
country being
livelihood.
recognized. Yeah, their livelihood. Here it's more of, you don't have enough women. Put more women on the front line. Is equality. This is war. You're fighting on the front lines. You're being shot at. Missiles are being shot at you. You're in stressful situations. The last 3 or 4 wars this country has went in: World War One, World War Two, Korean War, Vietnam, Desert Storm. These are the type of situations these women that fight for women equality, and remind you, they're not going to go to these front lines. these are the type of these are the type of situations they want these women to go to. If you want that, keep going. If you want that, good luck, but it's not a good situation.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it's I believe the fancy new term is an equity hire, okay?
Hmm.
Where it's basically yet another form of affirmative action, and I leave the importance and relative relevance of that debate to other heads and other spaces. But it's a case of okay, we just want women, so we're just going to put women here because we have to have them. You know, it reminds me of here in New York City, the FDNY, the fire department said that we have no female firefighters, so we have to have female firefighters. So academy, they did all the physical training, passed all the tests. Then the final test, you have to put on the full bunker gear, and you have to go into a burning building, up
Hmm.
the 4 or 5 flights, pick up a 200-pound dead weight, and carry it through the burning building and find your way out. Every single woman failed. They physically couldn't do it. And they kept failing and failing and failing until the fire department decided to give the female firefighters a separate test. They gave them a 100-pound dead weight. So the male firefighters still carried the same 200-pound dead weight. The female firefighters, I believe, carried a 100-pound or a 80-pound. So, God forbid I'm ever in a burning building. If a female firefighter is going to come to carry me, I'm 230 pounds. I guess I'm dead.
Hmm.
Now, that may sound a bit dramatic, and some may say, well, what does that have to do with the women in combat? Again, if you're in that, if you're in that situation, you know, again, every male who I've spoken to from the Army and the Marine Corps, they say they do not want to be in a contact situation with a woman beside them. It's not what they want. So I don't understand the purpose. If you're telling me that you're going to integrate training, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I don't necessarily have a problem with women in the military. A lot of guys who are in the military do. I don't, but full disclosure, I never served. But I absolutely do not see the relevance of having women in frontline combat units. Because, as Lionel said, if you're going to integrate training, the next logical step is to integrate frontline combat units.
Yeah, I read something the other day about them bringing in transgender or something to that effect. The possibility of bringing in transgendered into the units or something to that effect.
You know, it's funny you say that because unless I'm wrong, 2018 or 2017, didn't President Trump say that he wanted to reinstate the don't ask, don't tell policy and he wanted to ban transgenders and when he wanted to ban homosexuals and weren't there at least one or two transgender in the army who had to quit, unless I'm mistaken?
Yeah, the article was pretty vague. It didn't really go into too much detail, but it was just like a headline, little blurb. But
Mm.
that just struck me. Some of the changes that they're making to defend their country all seems to be not for all for naught. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't see the benefits unless you can somehow, unless you can basically, this is the military. So at the end of the day, unless you can show me and put a fully integrated male female unit under combat, under live fire, in actual contact situations, and see how that integrated unit performs, I don't see the benefit of it. I don't see women performing well under a combat situation. Maybe I'm wrong, but we'll see.
All right, let me hit this next article. This one is from Reuters.com. Cuba, Colombia face standoff over extradition request for ELN rebels. Cuba, Cuba has sidestepped the Colombian government's request for it to extradite 10 Marxist rebel commanders on the island for peace talks after Bogota blamed their National Liberation Army (ELN) for a car bomb on Thursday that killed 21 people. Cuba's foreign minister said in a tweet late on Friday that late on Friday the country would respect protocols of the negotiations that it had been hosting and was consulting with both parties and the guarantors of the talks. The protocols provide minimum security guarantees for guerrilla leaders to return to mountainous or jungle areas of Colombia with the help of the International Committee of the Red Cross, providing security from military attack for an agreed period. Colombian President Ivan Duque said on Saturday that its extradition request did not come with the context of abortive peace talks in Havana, but rather in response to a quote criminal act that violates human rights. Quote, no act of this nature merits any good of protocol that would avoid justice being done. For that reason, we call upon the government to hand over these criminals in order for justice to be done. The right-wing leader in the televised address. Colombians, including Duque, sorry, plan to join in the march on Sunday to protest against the car bombing. The ELN, which was formed by radical Catholic priests in 1964, has not claimed responsibility or issued a public statement on Thursday's car bombing that was the worst in Colombia in almost 16 years. It did not respond to a Reuters request for comment. In the attack, a car broke through a checkpoint onto the grounds of the General Santander School in the Colombian capital of Bogota before detonating, killing at least 20 police cadets as well as the driver, whom the government has identified as ELN explosives expert Jose Royas. This is interesting. This is interesting because the United States has a person called Fethullah Gulag, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who's supposedly an ex-Turkish politician who is accused of fostering a coup in Turkey in 2016. And Turkey has requested several times to have this person turned over, and the United States has not done so, despite the fact that this guy is allegedly on the international list of terrorists. And it's just interesting that you can just accuse anybody of anything and then say, well, you need to bring this person back here because we believe they did it without any evidence to, to be submitted. Lionel, you have anything you want to add to this?
I'm not familiar with this situation, but I do agree with what you're saying and the irony in situations. But I'm not familiar with the situation. I know it said a car bombing in Colombia. I haven't heard of that, so I don't have any major input on this one.
Paul Bryant, you have anything?
Yeah, pretty much mirror what you just said because the United States chooses to follow and ignore international law only as it suits them. The U.S. chooses to extradite and not extradite whenever it suits them. The U.S. Reaches out to other nations to deport and extradite again when it suits their interests. So, as you say, it's interesting because, the U.S. is among the biggest hypocrites on earth.
Right. And that's something I didn't know either. That the ELN was actually made by a Catholic priest. That's something interesting to learn.
Yeah, I did not know that. Which is funny because I don't know if it's seemingly unrelated, but in the early 2000s, the U.S. had about 50 to 80,000 troops on the ground in Colombia,
Mm-hmm.
which was never made. Which was never made. I'm not gonna say it wasn't made public, but it wasn't broadcast. You had to, if you didn't know someone who had knowledge of the situation, then you wouldn't know to actually do the research to find out. So the U.S. still the U.S. still does its dirt in other countries when it feels it suits their interests.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't be surprised if the ELN was supplied by the U.S., whether through the Green Berets or the CIA, which is what the Green Berets do.
Mm-hmm. All right, this next one is from telestorenglish.net. Venezuela's vice president to Mike Pence. Yankee, go home. Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez Tuesday said U.S. Vice President Mike Pence was, quote, openly calling for a coup d'etat in Venezuela after Pence said in a video. After Pence issued a video message of support to the Venezuelan opposition to encourage those who are protesting against President Nicolas Maduro and underlying U.S. backing for opposition lawmaker Juan um, uh, Guaido, the self-appointed head of the suspended National Assembly. The Venezuelan vice president's statements followed an earlier message from Venezuelan Information Minister George Rodriguez, who said Pence was, quote, promoting instability and violence in Venezuela, quote, because Mr. Pence doesn't have a job. Now he wants to come and run Venezuela, handing out instructions on what should happen in Venezuela tomorrow. Rodriguez said press in a short in a press in a short statement following Pence's interventionist message, quote, openly calling for a coup d'état in Venezuela. I will say I will say it I would say it like the Venezuelan people would say it to you. Yankee, go home. We are not going to allow you to intrude on issues of the country of the Bolivar and the country of Hugo Chavez. Venezuela's opposition on Wednesday plans to hold marches nationwide as part of an annual event that marks the fall of military government in 1958. In a taped video message in English with a few Spanish words and phrases mixed in, Pence, who has lashed out at Maduro before, declared him a, quote, dictator who has no right to claim power. Pence declared U.S. support for Guaido, with whom he spoke by phone earlier this month, and suspended the National Assembly, which he leads as the as the, quote, last vestige of democracy. Pence said Washington supported Guaido's decision to assert the body's powers, declare Maduro a usurper, and push for a transitional government to be established. The decision by the suspended National Assembly to appoint Guaido as the head of the body was invalidated by the country's Supreme Court because the body itself has been in contempt of court since 2016. What's interesting in this is that you have a slow rolling coup d'etat happening in the United States against Trump himself, and he would actually support the coup d'etat of another government in another country that he hasn't even visited before.
You know,
You can't make this shit up.
exactly. What Mike Pence did today, which is exactly what I wrote in the email chain a few hours ago. You know, there was a term for what Mike Pence did, and it was a term the United States has trotted out for decades: tampering with a foreign government, which was as duplicitous and hypocritical as it was when the U.S. first used it, which I believe was way back before World War One. You're tampering with a foreign government. Statements like that are designed to incite insurrection, coup d'état, revolutions in another nation, and all for what? Ultimately, behind the Monroe Doctrine for the oil, because the United States gets 50% of its oil from the nation of Venezuela. So exactly what they said is absolutely right. It is laughable. It is comical. It's absolutely comical. You're tampering in another sovereign nation.
Lino.
I agree with you all wholeheartedly. For Pence to say those things, you can see the coup d'etat happening in progress. Um, no matter if you agree with Maduro going to office on into office legally or illegally, the fact that you are the wrong person to say that, uh, the message may be right, but it's coming from the wrong mouth. So yeah,
You know what's interesting? Excuse me. Excuse me. The article mentions that Pence called the president of the National Assembly on the phone to congratulate him or to communicate something to him. To me, that's treasonous for that. For that Venezuelan to actually communicate with this with the vice president of the United States, and then have you know both you know Pence and Trump both recognize him as a legitimate government, and then where would he be serving from? Because there's no place for him in Venezuela to hide while he governs the state. It's impossible. But that's treasonous for him to actually communicate with these people on his side, because that's exactly what they're accusing Trump of, is communicating with the Russians. During the election. You can't make this up, Paul. Right?
You, you can. Which is why I said this is comical. The United States, the United States has literally leveled the same exact charge. You know what? When the United States said the same thing about the Russians when we had the Red Scare. Senator McCarthy, they said the same thing against Libya. I mean, nation after nation after nation. As you said, you can't make this stuff up, But the thing is this: one, people don't study history. They absolutely do not study history because history repeats itself over and over and over again. And most people don't do their research. They only see what's said on the 6 o'clock news. All right, and I continually make the argument: you cannot look through the garbage in hopes of searching for the gold and the silver. Right? If I'm giving you the garbage, one, it's all garbage, and anything that you find is only going to be fool's gold. All right. So when the media and the government are feeding you these lies, you have to dismiss all of it and look elsewhere to find the truth. You cannot, the, the vice president of the U.S. reached, whether you agree with the man or not, that is a sovereign nation. You do not have the right to nation tamper in another government. But you know what? Hey, the U.S. didn't want Patrice Lumumba in power, neither did France. So France didn't have the wherewithal to have him killed. So the U.S. did it,
Mm-hmm.
and we ended up with Mobutu. So it is what it is.
Mm-hmm. I'll get to the next article real quick. All right, this next article is from the MiamiHerald.com. Military officer opposed to Maduro detained on way to Florida. Now he may be deported. Relatives of a Venezuelan army officer who deserted because of his opposition to the Maduro regime and is being detained at a U.S. immigration center say they fear he will be jailed and tortured if he's deported. Lieutenant Argenis Gabriel Figueroa Rodriguez, what a long name, man, 25, asked for a 7-day leave of absence in September, but then walked into neighboring Colombia and from there headed to Orlando, where his two sisters live. But when his plane landed in Texas, he was questioned by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents. He first said he was visiting, but then admitted that he intended to ask for political asylum. Said one of the sisters. Uh, he has been held in U.S. immigration detention centers and is currently at the Joe Corley detention facility in Texas. Two officials there tried to get him to sign a voluntary deportation order, but he refused. Quote, I am afraid he will be deported and his life will be in danger because he deserted. I fear that if he's sent to Venezuela, he will be persecuted, arrested, and tortured when he arrives, Figueroa said. The Maduro regime issued an order for the lieutenant's arrest on October 29th, accusing him of desertion and treason, crimes punishable up to 30 years in prison. Venezuelan officials have twice called his father to ask about Lieutenant's whereabouts. He failed an initial screening interview known as a credible fear of persecution interview before U.S. immigration officials and again before an immigration judge, according to his sister. Quote, but he's telling the truth. He deserted because he does not agree with the Maduro regime, Figueroa said. Quote, I'm asking for shelter for my brother, protection in this country. The lieutenant was one of many Venezuelan military officers who had broken with the Maduro regime. A group of armed forces members now in Peru issued a statement last week accusing Nicolas Maduro of fraud in the recent presidential elections. He was sworn in to a new term on January 10th. We do not recognize Nicolas Maduro morals as president of Venezuela or commander in chief of the armed forces. They declared in a video broadcast by Peruvian TV channel UCI Noticias. Well, this is interesting because he doesn't pass this whole entire battery of exams that the United States has, to determine whether or not he's an actual fear of his life. How do you determine that?
Well, see, here's the thing, right? This kind of goes back to everything we've been talking about for the past 10, 15, 20 minutes. The U.S., as does every nation, they allow or they don't allow, quote unquote, conscientious objectors, political prisoners, asylum seekers, based pretty much on whether that person's views aligns with the country's interests, or if they feel that person can or cannot be an asset to them. That's pretty much how I'm taking a view on this. Because if he's opposing Maduro, he's against Maduro, then you would think that whoever here in the U.S. is calling the shots would want this guy here. So maybe he's not high enough up the chain. If he was a general, or if he had a spot in Venezuela's intelligence corps, then maybe he would have gotten asylum already. But he's just a rank and file officer who doesn't have enough of a following to warrant political asylum. Lena?
Now, how did they know he landed in Texas anyway?
Hello. Unless they've been tracking him. Well, if they say that he was at a holding center when he came to Texas, he would automatically be flagged in the system because he's a Venezuelan national. Plus, he's traveling on his Venezuelan passport. He's Venezuelan military, so I would assume he would automatically be red flagged, okay, by that very same software that Snowden blew the whistle on.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I agree with you, Paul. Not everybody can have that political asylum. They have to meet certain requirements, and requirements is uh, agreeing it with the country they're trying to go into their rules. If they don't, why should I grant you political asylum if you don't even agree with my rules and can be an asset to me. So there's rules to it. Maybe he didn't abide by them. Maybe something else occurred. But this goes with the previous article we read about how America is getting in the middle of Venezuelan politics, and this is just a piece in that puzzle.
Yeah, man, you you can't make this stuff up, man. And this is a classic Monroe Doctrine playbook, man. Unending chaos on top of chaos on top of chaos. The more you muddy the waters, the harder you make it for any semblance of a movement to change the country can form. And at the end of the day, that's the end game. Chaos on top of never ending chaos. You create such a situation that it makes it virtually impossible for any group to begin to build any intellectual and human capital, financial capital, military capital, and any outside backing to create any type of semblance, whether it be from the military, the government, or the financial sector. And ultimately, that is the goal, because the ultimate goal of the Monroe Doctrine, whether stated or implied, you know, the U.S. wants weak, destabilized nations because a strong nation then has to be dealt with on an equal footing. And the U.S. clearly, historically, does not want that.
Mhm.
You know, again, why is, you know, this guy, he's not high up, he's not high enough, he's not high enough up the chain to warrant political asylum. Had he flown a jet in, they probably would have given him asylum because he's a pilot, and he automatically has higher clearance because pilots have to know what these top secret missions are. Okay, if he was a scientist, boom, he's in. We probably wouldn't even never even heard about him. All right. As I said, if he was a general or if he was in their intelligence corps, he's high enough up where he knows more, where he has a following back home, he has contacts and influence back home. But he's just a rank and file officer, low ranking officer, no following, doesn't know enough. He gets no asylum.
Or maybe he was sent by Maduro intelligence agency and to infiltrate the United States.
Excellent point, Mike. Excellent point. Classic Russian tactic,
Hmm.
which the U.S. and the UK fell victim to, especially MI6, and it almost worked. Excellent point, Mike.
All right, let me get to this next one. This next one is from Telesur as well. Zimbabwe shuts down the internet. Zimbabwe has cut off internet access in the country as protests against rising fuel prices. At least 600 dead. People have been arrested and 3 people are dead. So
Actually, I'm sorry, really quick to what I just said. Russia actually did infiltrate British MI6, so it actually did work. Sorry.
mhm. Anybody have anything about Zimbabwe protests?
Yeah, it said that they are protesting because of the high, excuse me, because of the high cost of fuel. But then in the video, it said the government said they had to do that because to prevent illegal fuel trading. But that doesn't make sense. If you want to prevent illegal fuel trading, I would imagine you would cheapen the price of fuel in order to make fuel so cheap that you what's the purpose
Internal
of
profit.
yeah. So that excuse doesn't vibe with me, and they shut off the internet obviously because in past years, when you have a countrywide revolution, people tend to go to Twitter, social media, Facebook, things of nature to broadcast what's going on, not only to people inside the country, but to people outside the country and news sources, because they are on the ground personnel that can tell you what's going on. That's valuable to these news sources. So that's why they cut the internet off. But why, as to why they increased the price of fuel, that doesn't make sense. Their excuse doesn't make sense.
Paul Bryant.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with Lionel on this one. I looked at it. I poked around. I tried to look at a few other things. It is, to me, there's too many moving parts right now for me to really form a consensus either way. Too many moving parts, and a lot of things just don't make a lot of sense to me yet.
All right, let me get to the next article then. Come
Somebody have his boot on your neck there, Mike?
on. Whatever reason,
Just jokes, just jokes.
yeah, I know. Whatever reason, my screen is freezing.
How you doing there, Paul?
I'm doing good, bro. I needed a change of scenery. Recovery from my surgery's been very rough, so just got on a plane. I hopped over here, and it's quiet. Yeah, I'll probably be back in America about another 2 or 3 days.
All right. You just jumped on the plane, said, "I'm out, huh?"
Yeah, well, hey, man, place is a second home to me, so hey, why not?
All right.
I was here about a month ago, but hey, why not? Life is
Okay.
short, man, so just gotta enjoy yourself.
Okay.
All right, this next one is from CGTN.com. Zimbabwe president cancels Davos trip to deal with dissent back home. Zimbabwean President Emerson Mnangagwa has canceled his trip to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, and will return from a foreign tour to deal with rising tensions back home. In an update on his Twitter account on Sunday evening, Mnangagwa said, quote, "In light of the economic situation, I will be returning home after a highly productive week of bilateral trade and investment meetings. Quote, we will be ably represented in Davos by Minister of Finance um, Nakube. The first priority is to get Zimbabwe calm, stable, and working again. The president, who was due in Davos from January 22nd to 25th, did not mention when exactly he would arrive back home. Managua was due to make his second Davos appearance after becoming the first leader from Zimbabwe to attend the event last year. State media News Zion reported. Zimbabweans took to the streets last week to protest against fuel price increases. At least 3 people died during violent crashes, while several shops were looted and property destroyed. Mnangagwa was supposed to travel to Switzerland after visiting Russia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. Well, it seems to me that MI6 is in his backyard because the British don't like the idea of you being in Russia doing business in the Central Asian states and the close affiliation with China. considering that they were once a member of the British Commonwealth of States. So could be a a soft coup attempt against Managua in place to take him out and replace him with the vice president, which is his right hand man. What do you think about this, Paul?
I agree with you 1000%. For those who are unaware, the CIA was literally patterned after MI6. The first director of the CIA came from MI6, either the director or the assistant director. Counterintelligence. The United States literally did not even know counterintelligence existed until they were taught by MI6. So CIA always gets all the fanfare in all the movies, and people think of James Bond when they see MI6. But what the KGB does, they learned from MI6. What the CIA does, they learned from MI6. And I couldn't agree with you anymore. And we all know what the situation in England, not even just Brexit, but even since David Cameron instituted austerity, MI6 has Britain through MI6 has been reaching back out to its former states to create things just like this.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good observation from the both of y'all. I wouldn't have looked that deep into this, into this one. It did say that he went to those areas of the world to get to do bilateral trade. But wow, okay, I agree.
Yeah. So it's this isn't uncommon because keep in mind that the sanctions that's put on Zimbabwe is only by Western powers, the United Kingdom, the United States, and the European Union. They're the only ones who have sanctions on Zimbabwe. So every other country in the rest of the world doesn't have it.
Right, same exact thing with Cuba. It's only the U.S. that does that. You know,
And
England
Venezuela,
and Canada and Venezuela. I did not know that.
not Venezuela, Israel. Sorry. When they voted at the United Nations to lift the blockade last year,
Mhm.
last summer, the only two countries to veto um, the blockade, the lifting of the blockade, was Israel and the United States. Every other country supported it, including Australia.
Mm, interesting, interesting. But yeah, I keep a you have to keep a close eye because it's a little bit harder to see what England does and MI6, but on the other token, it's really not so hard because you have to look at the history of that nation because a lot of people are not aware of the former states that were either colonies of England or countries that were directly influenced by England. Even some of the former French colonies were actually were or now influenced by England through MI6.
Hmm.
So they actually tend to fly under the radar, but they're every bit as duplicitous and downright dirty and nasty as the U.S. is. They may be proper people sitting around the table with their tea and crumpets, but they don't have the military power. But through MI6, England is not to be underestimated.
Hmm. Yeah, and keep in mind that Zimbabwe has natural resources that gets used in cell phones as well. I think they have either cobalt or some form of lithium deposits inside Zimbabwe. So
Yeah, and the as I say, man, British Parliament, left front and center. They're constantly saying how the UK needs to be in Africa. Africa is a developing resource. The UK needs to be reaching out to its former to its former. They they now call them crown members, but they're former colonies. To do business trade and to form economies of scale. So what is that? What does that tell you? It should tell you MI6 is there on the ground influencing things.
Hmm.
And also, someplace that I'm nowhere near as well versed as you are, Mike, but over in China and the South China Sea and the conflict between I'm sorry, the so far political conflict between China and Japan, you know, I have to believe MI6 is down there as well.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Let me share my screen real quick. This is a recent one, I believe, from a day or so ago. From Reuters.com, South Africa's Ramaphosa calls for lifting the sanctions on Zimbabwe. This is recent. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa called on Tuesday for sanctions against Zimbabwe to be lifted, and his government was in discussion with Harare about how best to help. He said Zimbabwe's situation was a challenge for the whole of Africa, and he planned to meet its president Emerson Mnangagwa at a later stage. So, two children of the crown, quote unquote, are having these discussions about one lifting the sanctions, and two, both of them work with the Chinese directly. And three is a possible soft coup attempt through a uprising. Sounds like there's a lot going on in this area. So
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. They want to raise sanctions on Zimbabwe.
uh-huh.
That's yeah, yes, that's interesting. As to specifically why, you know what I mean?
Yeah, they're joined at the hip. The
Yeah,
ANC, the ANC, and Zanapu Zanapi Party. I think that's how you pronounce it
I think so.
for Zimbabwe, which is Mugabe's party, right? So that they're joined at the hip.
Hmm.
Um, I find this interesting because, as you say, joined at the hip, I think that they may be a bit more joined at the hip than people realize. I have some friends, I have some friends who are South African, born and raised, live there, own a home, and have a business, and that the the violence against white farmers in Zimbabwe has found its way into South Africa, and a lot of the same things are happening. Um, White South Africans are literally targeted at random, beaten, sometimes even murdered, houses burned, businesses burned, and there are a lot of Zimbabweans in South Africa that's not making the Western media, and that um, Rob Mugabe Mugabe did a lot of underhanded, okay, illegal business in South Africa on the ground, and had a lot of interests on the ground, and that now that he's gone, that things have kind of become self-sustaining, and that there could there's there's a lot of unrest in South Africa that is directly tied to Zimbabwe. So they are more tied at the hip than people realize. and that the country, unbeknownst or at least uncovered by the media here in the Western world, that the country is moving back towards an apartheid state. So there is a lot of moving parts here, and a lot of it is directly tied to Mugabe and the people he had under him and with him. So when you say, Mike, they're tied at the hip, which we know, but even I didn't know. I found out from my South African friends they're more tied at the hip than I was previously aware of.
Right. Yeah. You keep in mind that it was North Korea and China who were helping train the the uprising for Mugabe's party, with a lot of Kalashnikovs and IEDs, attacking the apartheid governments.
Hmm. And see, I first off that I want to say, right now I'm separating any issues of Mugabe, Zimbabwe, Black Africans, white Zimbabweans, white South Africans. I'm not going to specifically deal with any of those arguments. I think that if we want to have that, maybe this is not necessarily the right time and space right now. But I'll say this specifically because I used to be of one mind on those actions. I've kind of swayed toward the other direction on that. So I'll say this: at this point, it's veered into the space of it's just violence for the sake of violence, which is tied to a lot of the illegal and dictatorial nature of what Mugabe became over time.
Mhm.
Any thoughts?
Well, like anybody who's been in power that long, they would be absorbing some form of corruption or immorality, right? And
Hmm.
incongruent with with the tenets of the party itself.
Right.
So I don't hold the party or the government to those actions. But what I will say is that China has invested a lot into into South Africa and what do you call it, Zimbabwe. So they have a lot of justification for being there and actually having stake in that country. And with that being said, Zimbabwe actually has banks that washed North Korean money, over the years. During
Ah, I did not know that.
Yeah, North Korea has built several hospitals and weapons for Africans during decolonialization. They
Interesting.
were they were in Egypt. They were in many of the sub-Saharan states, actually helping to overthrow most of those dictatorial powers of the apartheid government. So along with Cuba, along with the Palestinians as well. So that's why they have such relationships, such a strong relationship, and join at the hip.
Okay. Well, you know what? In closing, I'll say this. I'm a firm believer in the spirit of diversity of the diversity of thought and views and mindset. So I wholeheartedly believe that this is a space for that, and I think that that's a good thing.
Mhm. All right, let me hit this next article real quick. All right, this next article is from NewYorkTimes.com. Bombing in Syria targets U.S.-led military patrol. A car bombing targeted a joint American Kurdish patrol in Syria on Monday, injuring a number of fighters from a Kurdish-led force allied with the United States. The Islamic State claimed responsibility for the attack. The explosion came just 5 days after at least 15 people, including 4 Americans, were killed in a suicide bombing by the Islamic State in Manbij in Syria, which is controlled and protected by American-backed local forces. Coming only weeks after President Trump ordered American troops to withdraw from Syria, the attacks serve as a reminder that the Islamic State, while controlling just a small fraction of the territory it once had, remains capable of striking in what was considered relatively safe territory. The Amaq news agency, which is linked to the militant group, reported that a suicide bomber had attacked a convoy of the United States troops and Syrian Democratic Forces in what it claimed as a, quote, martyrdom-seeking attack. Wording, wording, it, wording it uses take responsibility. The explosions took place near the town of Shadi in Hasaka province in far northeastern Syria, according to both Amaq and the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a group based in Britain that monitors the Syrian war. I'm not going to read this whole entire thing because it's a lot of fluff about Trump. But what wasn't happening before, American troops weren't being killed before. Now all of a sudden, American troops are being killed just as soon as Trump wants to pull out.
You hit the nose right on the head because we spoke about this last week. How now you have this military, U.S. military people that were sitting at a restaurant and they were targeted. Their restaurant was targeted. Now all of a sudden you have this coincidence of not high, but you have this coincidence of more and more attacks being pulled out. These brazen attacks being pulled out after Trump announced that withdrawal of American troops. So yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
Paul Bryant.
Yeah, my first thought was this is extremely, extremely convenient. All right, I'm thinking, was this a false flag operation? That's that's what I'm thinking. This is I was this a false flag operation?
Mm-hmm. Keep
Possibly.
it.
I'm sorry. No, I'm done. Go ahead.
No, I just want to point out real quick that the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, that's based in London, is actually an MI6 operation. Um, and the white helmets, quote unquote, the white helmets in Syria, or that was in Syria, was a MI6 operation. They invested $100 million into the white helmets. The white helmets were supposed to be the non-profit, rescuers, close to the Red Cross. In reality, they just had white helmets and they never, with orange vests. What can you do with white helmets and an orange vest when there's bombs going off? I mean, it's not like this is a construction site. This isn't, OSHA.
Just make yourself a target.
Well, not make yourself a target, but they put these helmets on and pulled the cameras out and pulled out these garden hoses and made it seem like, oh, this Assad used chemicals and now we have to wash these people off with these garden hoses from Home Depot that they bought. It's just interesting. I want people to understand that that's who the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights is. Why is it based in London and not based in Damascus? It doesn't make any sense.
That automatically tells you MI6.
Mm-hmm.
Automatically. You know, Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland in 1989.
Pan Am?
Yes, sir. There were two CIA assets who were on the plane, who were coming back, who were flying back to America, who were going to expose some CIA operations in that part of in the Arab speaking part of the world.
Hmm.
So what happened? Plane blows up. Where? Over Lockerbie, Scotland, claimed it was a terrorist operation. So
And
what?
they blamed it on Libya, which is Muammar Gaddafi, and then Muammar Gaddafi turned over to his guys and paid reparations of $100 billion.
Exactly. So that either that was CIA, MI6, or joint between the two, but false flag operations. Okay, the U.S. learned from MI6. The Brits have been doing that since the late 1700s. False flag operation. They invented it. They know it better than anyone.
Hmm. I know you're gonna say something.
No, no.
Yeah. So U.S. military now being killed off, picked off, in their convoys and things like that, where they were never. This was never the case 6 months ago, or even 90 days ago. Um, they were relatively safe. They had the U.S. I want to say it's the Sixth Fleet. Um, the Sixth Fleet was actually protecting them. You had F-18, not F-18, F-22 Raptors and F-18 Super Hornets covering them over Syria. They were shooting down Syrian warplanes, shooting down Russian warplanes, bombing Assad soldiers, uh, giving cover to the Kurds, and now all of a sudden they just happen to be randomly dying. I don't know. Doesn't really add up.
You know, the Vietnam War, the escalation was blamed on the attack of the USS Pueblo, which there was overwhelming mountain of evidence to prove that that was a U.S. false flag operation, which points to one thing that citizens of no nation ever wants to accept, that its own government will kill its own citizens and its own military for the purposes of either starting a war or creating some other problems in another nation. No government through history, it's been proven if you do the research, any government through history, they will willingly kill their own citizens, including their own military, if they feel it suits their purposes.
Hmm.
And the United States is no different. The United States has absolutely killed its own citizens and its own military. That's why they're called false flag operations. Or whether it's will kill citizens of even allies if they feel it serves their purposes. That's why it's called a false flag operation. The blame is placed on another nation, a false flag, for those who are unaware of the term false flag operation.
Hmm. I know you had something you want to add.
No, no.
Okay. Um, I wouldn't put it past that Israel has something to do with this as well. Israel doesn't, has vested interest in seeing Syria destabilized, and Trump pulling out troops is almost counterproductive to what they want to do in Syria. Make sure that the Syrian government can't recover any of its land. And the number one supporter of the Kurds outside of the United States was actually Israel. Israel had stated that they were going, if there was going to be a Kurdish state, that they would be the number one supporters of it.
You did say, I'm sorry, that was said, and you bring up an excellent point because even I sometimes have to admit I sometimes overlook the Mossad because the Mossad are every bit as dangerous as the KGB, MI6, and the CIA. And they have been accused of conducting operations against the U.S. military without the U.S.'s knowledge because they felt it's said operations aligned with Israeli interests.
USS Liberty.
Correct, which I just spoke on. 100%. Yes, sir.
Mhm. All right, let me get to this next article. This one's from AlJazeera.com. Syrian air defense repels Israeli attack in South. State media. Air defense systems store Israeli air raid, state media reports hours after blast rocks Damascus. The Syrian military has thwarted an Israeli attack, shooting down several missiles in the south of the country, state media and Russian Ministry of Defense said. Quote, our air defense systems thwarted an Israeli air aggression and prevented it from achieving any of its goals, a military source told state news agency Sana on Sunday. Russia's Ministry of Defense said in a Twitter post that the Syrian military destroyed 7 Israeli rockets near Damascus airport. It said no casualties were reported and the airport was not damaged. An Israeli military spokesperson declined to comment on the subject on the report. Shortly after the incident, Israel's military said its Iron Dome missile defense system shot down a rocket that had been fired at the northern port of the occupied Golan Heights on the Syrian frontier on Sunday. The military statement did not specify where the rocket had been launched from. The northern Golan is also close to Lebanese territory. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had acknowledged an Israeli attack last week on what he called an Iranian arms cache in Syria, where Tehran provides Damascus with vital support. He told his cabinet Israel had carried out hundreds of attacks over the past years of Syria's war to curtail Iran and its ally Lebanon's Hezbollah. Usually silent about its attacks on Iranian targets near its frontier, Israel has lifted the veil this month, a sign of confidence in a campaign waged amid occasional tensions with Russia, which is strongly behind Syria. So Israel took out a Pantsir S-1 mobile air defense system, and they only did so with while the air defense system had spent all its ammo. So it has I want to say it's 12 surface to air missiles plus a twin 30mm cannon and a microwave radar system. And what happened was the air defense system had shot down all the missiles that came from Israel. And when the system had the air defense system had spent all its ammo, Israel used a suicide drone to take it out. So it made it seem as if the air defense, the Syrians are incompetent at defending themselves, and look how weak they are. And reality is, when the air defense system had spent all its ammunition and was waiting for reload, that's when they went and took it out. Lino, you have anything you want
to add? Oh man. To be honest, nothing that's different from what you said on this one.
Mm-hmm.
I think. Paul, you have any more? Yeah, nothing different.
Paul Bryant.
Yeah, I automatically dismissed about 90% of anything Israel says. The Mossad, the bulk of their operations are right there in that region. They infiltrate civilian, military, and political at every level. That's the bulk of what the Mossad does. So I totally disregard everything that Israel says and does. And what you, as you just gave further clarity to the situation, it's self-explanatory. So apparently, there's an old saying: a bully is a bully until that one time where you stop dead in your tracks, you turn around and you pop him right in his nose, and he stops in his tracks. So you know what? Good for them. The Syrians, good for them.
All right, let me get to the next article.
Got to close out those Pornhub windows there, Mike.
I don't have those. It's I have two laptops, so I have to jump back and forth.
I know, just jokes.
Mhm. All right, this next one is from Reuters.com. Assad blocks access to Damascus for EU envoys, diplomats. Syria's President Bashar al-Assad has revoked special visas for European Union diplomats and officials traveling regularly between Beirut and Damascus, complicating efforts to distribute aid to civil war victims, three senior EU diplomats said. Since conflict broke out in Syria in 2011, the EU has used the Lebanese capital, the nearest major city, for its diplomatic base while closing most embassies in Damascus in protest over what they describe as Assad's brutal assault on the opposition. But the special permission to use multiple multiple entry Syrian visas for access to Damascus was rescinded at the start of January with no explanation from the Syrian government. The EU diplomat said, meaning personnel have to apply for time-consuming single-entry visas every time they wish to travel. The EU diplomats who spoke on condition of anonymity said they believe it was an attempt to try and force European governments and the bloc to reopen embassies in Damascus, as the Syrian army, backed by Russian and Iranian forces, regains control of most of the country. Quote, it's a serious problem for the EU's humanitarian assistance, said one EU diplomat. Quote, this is a measure that hits diplomats and staff of European government embassies and the European Union institutions. Reuters was unable immediately to reach Syrian foreign ministry officials for comment. After more than 7 years of devastating war drawing in foreign powers, the European Commission's the EU executive has channeled almost 800 million euros, $900 million, on food, medicine, shelter for Syrians inside the country. There was no immediate available estimate for the impact for the multi-visa ban, but a commission spokesman said that the bloc was, quote, doing everything in our power to take appropriate measures to minimize any impact on delivery of EU humanitarian assistance inside Syria. What do you think about this, Paul?
Not sure. Not sure. I'm generally, I'm generally supportive of al-Assad because the U.S. has consistently trying to get him out of office, literally lying about killing his people, using chemical weapons against his people, and just out and out brazen lies, and doing their best to foment a resistance against him. So, hate to sound like a broken record, but a lot of moving parts, and I don't generally don't believe anything the U.S. or the U.K. has to say against Bashir al-Assad.
I want to pass on this one. Uh, it was going on anti gravity.
Hey, brothers, how you guys doing?
Hey,
Good,
man,
yourself.
anti-gravity, how are you, bro?
Not bad, not bad. Sorry, I didn't hear. I only saw the last part of this article, so I can't comment too much on it.
I'll give my analysis and then we'll move on. But what the diplomats were doing was they was using their diplomatic status to bring quote unquote humanitarian aid, but in reality they were bringing weapons and ammunition to the rebels or to the terrorists, disguising it as a diplomatic envoy in a mission. That was not the case, and this is how they were able to drop off weapons, or how the rebels were able to sustain themselves for such long periods of time. I think I've talked about this before, and then maybe we've talked about this on different hangouts. But terrorists still need to eat too, right? Who's dropping off MREs to these guys? They're not coming up with their own MREs, and they need ammunition, for their Kalashnikovs. So when you have a quote unquote diplomat, dropping off quote unquote humanitarian aid. Um, Russia already delivers humanitarian aid to most of the Syrian territories. So why do you need the EU to drop off humanitarian aid? I just find that to be strange that diplomats are always trying to avoid going to Damascus, but they'll go straight to these other places, these private planes, um, dropping off pallets of goods, so to speak, barrels of goods, and come to find out that they dropped off a couple of years ago. They dropped off humanitarian aid from a Hercules cargo jet, or something like that. And it just so happens it ended up in the rebels' hands. It parachuted down, and it was supposed to go to the civilians, and it just ended up in the terrorists. The terrorists ended up taking it and redistributing it to themselves. Meanwhile, the civilians end up starving to death.
Now, I don't mean to laugh like it's funny, but now was that deliberate and the excuse was just used, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the thing is, like, to me, if Assad is the recognized government of Syria, then why not go through Syrian channels to deliver the aid to them and let them distribute it out? Why try to deliver it in areas like Aleppo where it's a war zone?
Exactly, which to me, points to CIA and MI6. Green Berets and Royal Marines.
Hmm.
Special Air, the SAS and Delta Force and Force Recon. That's what all of that points to me. Because all of those guys either train with, train or work with um, insurgents on the ground. And again, he was 100% right to revoke the free use visas because they were clearly being used, to sow the seeds of rebellion in his own country. So more of the same from the usual suspects.
Let me get to this next article real quick. 'Cause I think it falls in line. This one's not on the docket, but it was attached to a different email. But this one is from the Syrian ambassador to the United Nations, threatens to attack Ben Gurion Airport after the Israel attack on Damascus. Speaking before the United Nations Security Council, Jafari Jafari addressed the attack the Israeli Air Force carried out on early Monday, on Iranian Revolutionary Guards elite Quds Force targets near Damascus, hitting a munitions storage site, a site located in Damascus International Airport, an Iranian intelligence site, and an Iranian military training camp. He further he further wondered if Syria should draw the Council's attention by quote practicing its legitimate right of self-defense and responding to the Israeli aggression on Damascus International Airport, in the same way on Tel Aviv Airport. At least 21 people were killed in the raid on Sunday, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said Tuesday. The UK-based monitor said the death toll included 15 foreign nationals, of which at least 12 were members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. Syrian state-run news outlets said that at least 4 Syrian soldiers were killed in the bombardment. In an official statement, the IDF spokesperson unit confirmed that, quote, during the strikes, dozens of Syrian surface-to-air missiles were launched, despite clear warnings to avoid such fire. In response, several of the Syrian armed forces aerial defense batteries were targeted. Quote, Iran firing at Israel is another proof to its intentions while attempting to entrench its Syria. I think this has been translated, and the danger it poses to Israel and to the regional stability. The IDF will continue to act with determination against Iranian entrenchment in Syria, the army said. Quote, Israel sees Syria as one responsible for Iran's actions on its soil, warning it to avoid any action against Israel. So what we see now, picture of Ben Gurion Airport, what we see now, Syria allegedly does have ballistic missile capabilities. For whatever reason, they haven't used it. I guess this is like their last card on the deck, right? Or their ace in hole. They have they have the green light to actually respond to those sort of attacks, that sort of aggression. I'm wondering why they have not. Paul Grant, you have any idea why they wouldn't retaliate?
Only thing that I can think of off the top of my head is Assad may feel he doesn't have the military capability to wage a sustained war against Israel. He may feel to do so would be to destroy any current goodwill he has in the UN and other nations besides the U.S. and the American axis of evil. He may feel that to do so might incur, might not necessarily be in his best interest. Again, all guesses, but I can't readily see any other reason, besides those for him not using these ballistic missiles if he has them. Which again just says maybe all that he has are those ballistic missiles. He may not have a powerful enough military. He may not have enough ground troops. He may not have enough ground artillery. He may not have enough jets to wage an all-out sustained warfare against Israel. Just because you have military forces doesn't mean you can actually wage a sustained campaign. So I can't see any other reasons for him not using offensive capability.
I know you have.
Could it be? Oh, go ahead.
No. I'll pass on this one.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I was thinking, could it be that he's trying to avoid it devolving into a greater conflict? Because if he responds back to Israel, then Israel's going to go cry to the U.S. And then the U.S. at that point, they have, I guess, enough political cover to do a full-scale invasion of Syria. And then, then the Iranians have to respond. And then maybe that's kind of a prelude to them also having a pretext to invade Iran as well. You guys think that could be a possibility?
Could be.
You know what? I was just about to say that.
What's going
Now
on,
let
Wacky?
Hey, what's going on? I'm sorry I didn't say hi in the beginning. Hello, Mike, and hello to the rest of the panel.
What's going on,
Uh,
brother?
So, bro.
Hey,
what's up?
boy.
I, I was just thinking about what anti-gravity was saying, and let's just say if that happens, you know, Syria responds, then Israel runs to the U.S., then the U.S., then it becomes an all-out war. Then Iran jumps in. Then the other two nations that might jump in is China or Russia because they're in league with Iran and Syria. So I was thinking that in the back of my mind. What do you guys think about that?
And if you want, anybody wants to jump in.
Now,
I mean, I'm just guessing. I'm sorry. I'm just guessing. It's just theories. I'm not saying what I'm saying is fact, but
you say your piece, Mike, and then I'll go.
No, I think you're onto something. Netanyahu is doing this for political purposes because he's under investigation by the by the Israeli government for multiple corruption charges, including his wife. I think they've already arrested his wife. So he's trying to make it seem like he's the only guy, who can stand up for Israel, and this is why, you have to support the Likud party because, um, I'm the only guy that's willing to stand up for Israel by bombing Syria, bombing Lebanon, taking out Palestinians, innocent Palestinians on the ground, mowing the grass as they call it, um, and I'll deport all these nigger Africans back to where they come from. I don't know if you guys seen the recent videos on YouTube of how these Zionists in Israel have been basically calling these African women nigger bitches.
yes,
Go back to your nigger country. Um,
yes, hmm
and what a lot of people don't realize is that at one point before Jews were going to go to Palestine, they were actually going to go to Uganda and Madagascar and Argentina and these other places in Africa, um, and settle their Jewish state there. And I find that to be very interesting that you want these people to leave, but you're illegally occupying somebody else's country too, and now you're attacking other people's countries in order to justify your existence. This is really what it's coming down to in my assessment.
Also, don't you think that's interesting phrasing that kind of became it kind of became popular, but it's a propaganda piece in its of self. No country has a right to exist. That's what country has a right to exist. That's no, the UN doesn't. International law doesn't support that kind of notion. The only
What?
right to exist that you have is that you defend yourself, that you have a country. That's the only right that you have.
Well, it's funny you say that because you said the UN said no nation has a right to exist. The U.S. and Britain helped helped people people go to the sovereign nation of Palestine and murdered men, women, and children in their beds and created the state of Israel because they said they have a right to exist in their homeland. So I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying. I'm agreeing with what you're saying. I find it extremely duplicitous and hypocritical that the UN would take that stance when they allowed that to happen, because the UN never officially recognized the official state of Palestine, which was there for hundreds of years, but yet they instantly recognized Israel, which was literally created on the backs of murdered men, women, and children in their bed in the sovereign nation of Palestine to create Israel. Okay. And the quote unquote occupied territories are what was left of what was the sovereign nation of Palestine. And they herded them in the same way that the U.S. government does to um, Indians or Native Americans on reservations. But getting back to what um, Wacky had said, I think you may be onto something. I don't necessarily think that the U.S. would out and out use that justification to go to out and out war, saying that, oh, Israel was attacked, so now we have to go in. But you do make a good point about the other nations stepping in. And as I've said, I'm of the belief that the U.S. and China right now are waging a cold war through proxy states. So maybe, I think you make a very good point on what you said.
Anti-gravity, you got anything else you want to add?
No, that's it for me.
All right. All right, this next one's from AlJazeera.com. Ex-U.S. Marine held in Russia for spying was misled, says lawyer. Sure. Lawyer claims USB drive was given to his client was meant to contain information on Russian culture, not not state secrets. Sure. You need Russian culture to be put on a USB drive. You just can't Google it. The lawyer of a former U.S. Marine accused of spying by Russia has said his client has been misled before his arrest and believed that a USB drive handed to him in a hotel room contained holiday photos rather than secret information. Russian Federal Security Service arrested Paul Whelan, who holds American, British, Canadian, and Irish passports from a Moscow hotel room on December 28th. Interesting, British and Canadian and Irish passports. Whelan appeared in the Moscow court on Tuesday, where a judge rejected his plea for release on bail. If found guilty on espionage, he could be jailed for up to 20 years. Whelan, who denies the charges, was taken into custody after receiving a USB drive allegedly containing a list of all employees of secret Russian state agency. Russian online news portal Rosbal.ru reported earlier this month. The website cited an unnamed Russian intelligence source as saying that Whelan had been spying for 10 years using this internet to identify targets he could obtain information from, and that the list he was caught with had long been had been long of interest to the U.S. spies. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov appeared to support that version of events, telling reporters Whelan had been, quote, caught red-handed carrying out specific illegal actions in his hotel room. His lawyer, Vladimir Zerbinvanov, said Whelan did not know the contents of the USB drive. Quote, on the USB drive, Paul received information that I confirm is a state secret. Zerbinov told journalists, quote, in reality, Paul was supposed to receive from the person information that is not state secret, he said, indicating he was expected to be given cultural material and photographs. No need for Dropbox. The lawyer said Whelan was arrested before he had a chance to see what was on the drive. What do you gentlemen think about this? Anybody's free to go.
That's a lot of information though. That USB flash drive, all employees. That's a gold mine.
Mm-hmm.
So according to this article, someone met Whelan in a hotel room and gave him a USB flash drive in which he didn't know what was inside of it, but he accepted the flash drive. Right? Am I correct? Is this?
Mm-hmm.
And what I have to say about that is womp womp. That's a terrible lie. Womp womp.
No, the only thing I have to say is he a CIA agent or is he a CIA asset? Is he Delta? Is he Force Recon? Is he Ranger? Is he at this point ex-military and he's just a black water contractor? Because if you expect me to believe any of that bullshit in that story, I mean, come on, man, come on, cut it out.
He's an ex-marine.
Oh, he's ex-marine. Well, hey, there you go.
He's an ex-marine who was working as a CISO for a auto parts manufacturer that for an American auto manufacturer.
Who just happened to have
AC
passports
Delco.
from 4 different nations. Okay. All right. Okay.
He had
Passport.
what from 4 different nations?
Oh,
Passport.
I'm sorry.
Passports?
Hmm.
Yes. U.S., Canadian, British, and who was the fourth again, Mike? I'm sorry.
Irish.
Ireland.
Right. So he had passports from 4 different nations, all in his name, I believe. Right.
Hmm.
Okay. All right. I guess. I guess that's possible on a planet where the sky is green, but not on this planet. So hey, listen.
Yeah, that definitely Mike hit it on the head. He needed, I guess, a floppy disk of Russian culture when he can Google it.
Yeah, well, I mean, if he wanted to know about Russian culture and how to speak Russian, he could have easily had gotten what's that Dragon Speaks or Google Translator
Rosetta
or something
Stone.
like that. Yeah, Rosetta
Yeah,
Stone. He could have
yeah,
went to YouTube and looked up some Russian videos of like dash cam of Russian accidents, all over Russia, with drunk Russians who crash into each other all the time. That's Russian culture.
exactly.
Right. I think maybe he's not an agent because if he was an agent, he would have had like diplomatic cover. So I'm guessing maybe Paul was right about asset or he's doing some freelancing for the government over there.
Actually, when he got arrested, the first people to come visit him was ambassadors, not ambassador, but members of the American consulate in Moscow.
Oh, okay.
And every CIA station is in the U.S. Embassy.
Hmm.
Every CIA station is in the embassy. Then you have the safe houses that are around the city and around the nation.
And don't forget, for people listening to this, when the United States was deporting, was throwing out all of these Russians from their embassies in the United States, and Russia retaliated. Russia selectively sent out their deported their spies. So that's why they only cut their numbers in half because those are the people that they had on the list.
Right. Because no one, even though the Brits did it first, no one has been better at long-term deep infiltration than the Russians. Yeah, so I mean, you know what? Listen, I have nothing more to say.
Disappointing, Paul. Considering that,
What's that? You broke up there, Mike.
no, I was saying that I'm disappointed because, in considering that the guy who was caught spying, his name is Paul too. Allegedly, his name is Paul.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see the name on his DD-214 to find out what his real name is.
Hmm. All right, let me hit this next one real quick. WBUR.org. China wants to establish a base on the moon, space program experts say. China recently completed the first ever landing on the dark side of the moon. It was a technical achievement and a coup for the country's ambitions to outshine U.S. space program. Goswami, an expert on China's space program, tells Here and Now, Here and Now's Peter O'Dowd that its Chang'e 4 lunar probe has important implications for future space. quote, it's a very, very symbolically and technologically significant development, and it shows to the world that China's space program has arrived and can do original feats on its own, says Goswami, who's working on a book about, quote, expansionism, territoriality, and resource nationalism in space. China's long-term goal is to establish a base on the moon, which it can utilize for research in deep space exploration and asteroid mining. Swami says that contrasts with U.S. goals, which are primarily focused on Mars. Swami says China's efforts in space come amid a loss of American momentum. Quote, in the last 20 years, the U.S. has lost focus, especially under the first two Bush administrations and to an extent under Obama, she says. Under President Xi Jinping, space is one of the top most priorities of the Communist Party of China, and they have committed resources to that next 20 years. Yes, this is a pretty long article. Basically, what's starting to happen here is that the United States sees China's moon ambitions as a big threat to them, and establishing a base on the moon means that they can pretty much dominate that part of space, and they can actually keep the Americans out. When they did start this moon mission, a lot of their intelligence actually came from the European Space Agency, Russian Space Agency, I believe, and some other open sources outside of NASA. So the United States didn't want anything to do with this whole entire mission, and they were able to actually complete it without the United States. So that shows of United States that China is able to do things without your input and your your beck and call, so to speak. Anybody on the panel have anything you want to add to this?
Well, first off, I am 100% do not believe China landed the first mission on the dark side of the moon. Number two, we haven't seen any pictures back from their landing on the dark side of the moon. And I agree 1,000% with everything that you just said. I will say this. It's going to be interesting to see how things develop moving forward, because we're all well aware that NASA does not have any more space shuttles. NASA does not launch any rockets up in space. Yet, U.S. astronauts and scientists are on the International Space Station. And how do they get back and forth? On Russian rockets. So whatever animosity is supposed to be between the U.S. and Russia, it clearly is not extending towards the space program. So how big of adversaries are they really? So there's a lot of moving parts here. I don't believe there's so much animosity. However, I do think you raised an excellent point, Mike, as far as looking to see how, for whatever reason, the U.S. is focused on Mars, where China's focused on the moon. So that's something that we all need to keep an eye on.
Mm-hmm. I know.
Yeah. This article shows give you a glimpse into how China is planning, what their plans are, and it also compares China's plans with what America is doing, that we think America is doing, without being privy to top secret information. China, it says America is planning to put people on Mars. It says China's aiming for the moon first, then Mars. I agree in terms of that, because once you do, it's cheaper to go to the moon first. It takes 6 months at its closest point between Earth and Mars. It's cheaper to go to the moon first. Only then once you perfect that technology, that allows you to go to Mars. So the pathway that they're taking, I agree. the planning. They're focusing on the moon first and putting all their resources in there. But I say all this to say it shows where China's going.
Mhm.
And I understand people when you mention Space Force, people laugh like, "Oh, we have problems here on Earth," blah blah blah. As a country, as a government, as the military, you have to keep tabs on another country, especially another country that is a superpower. You can't lax. You have to play keep up.
Anti-gravity.
I'd just be interested to see what the other countries are now going to do about it.
Hmm.
If they did land the moon, uh, if they do start building a base on on the moon, will the U.S. plant another flag? This time, one that doesn't wave in the wind, right?
Yeah.
So it will be interesting what the U.S., Russia, the EU, Canada, India, they start doing now.
Well, several countries have moon missions in the next 5 years. Israel, India. I think Pakistan even has one as well. And I wanted to say that Morocco actually just put a satellite up maybe about a year or so ago. So they have some ambitions as well. I mean, because they have the resources. Um, but we'll see. Wacky, do you have anything you want to add to this?
Uh, um, not more so about that,
Hmm.
but I'll just say that this topic is a kick in the face to all the flat Earth believers. You
Hmm.
know, because the flat Earth believers, if anyone's familiar with that concept, is they also believe that people that believe in this flat Earth theory also believe that there's no solar system in the sense that there's no Mars, there's no other planets, and so and they claim how NASA's always lying about what's going on in outer space because they claim flat Earth believers also claim that there's no such thing as outer space.
Hmm.
So when I'm listening to you read some of the article, I'm like, okay, all these nations, right? These different nations, China, Russia, the United States, now you're saying Morocco and other nations had successful missions going back and forth to different parts of space and back to Earth.
Hmm.
So that's a kick in the face to all the flat Earth believers because there's straight up obvious facts proving that that whole theory is not true.
Hmm.
Well, when I was a little boy, um, way back in the Stone Age of the '70s, the United States launched satellites. All right, and as they were seen from telescopes from people around the world, and as they passed Venus, and then they passed Saturn years later, and then they passed Jupiter and Uranus and the farther planets, they keep sending back pictures. But the flat Earth people will tell you that they have chapters all around the globe. Just ask them; they'll tell you. But you know, corny joke. But
Hmm.
you know, to Lionel's point about travel, interstellar travel. I think people need to look at what CERN is doing. CERN is working on fusion containment because chemical propulsion is not viable for interstellar travel. All right. It
CERN.
Yes, CERN, CERN
Yep.
in Switzerland. They're working on viable fusion containment. It has been invented. Fusion containment works, but it's not viable because you have to put more energy in than what you get out currently. So they're developing it to make it viable because chemical propulsion is not viable for interstellar travel. If it's going to take you 6 months to travel from Earth to our next closest planet, which is Mars, that's not viable. It's not. And I'll tell you something else. Even light speed travel is not viable for true interstellar travel because at light speed, to get from one end of our solar system to the other end at light speed takes 8 minutes. That's not viable when the next closest star at light speed is 1,000 years away. So fusion containment and even other forms of propulsion have to be developed. So chemical propulsion is not viable, which is why CERN and DARPA and a few other agencies around the world, excuse me, are working on that. Okay, so I'll say that whether it's a space force or whatever, what any other name you so choose to call it, the technology is real and it is being developed and it is being worked on because that is the next frontier. Now, whether you're talking Star Wars, as President Reagan talked about when he first got elected, again when I was young, back in '80, you know, that's the first step. But whether it's weapons or exploration, you know, that tech is real, and it's been worked on for decades, and it's being worked on right now.
I just want to actually I don't have the link with me. I think we might have covered it Monday or maybe last Monday on the Space and Technology Hangout. Um, China did send back photos of the mission,
Um,
real time photos of because they it does have a camera on the module itself and it has a camera on the rover, so it shows a they showed a picture of both of them reflecting each other in real time. So
okay, all right. Then I'm going to look at those because I'd be very curious to see those. So that's great. It's awesome.
yeah,
Now,
and it cost them only $8 billion in comparison to the United States, that spends I think it was 80 billion just for their or was it over 180 billion dollars for their Mars mission. So
Which I'll say I don't know how much of that is black budget. I don't know how much of that is for the actual program. But if the U.S. is spending that much, that's telling me that whatever they're working on is not chemical propulsion, and it's more than just sending a rover there to find giant robots. Right? They're working on a lot more than just that.
go ahead, Lino.
No, I have I have no other comments.
I wasn't sure if that was you trying to get in.
now I'll just say one thing. Mike, you just stated that China has real time photos of their mission to
Hmm.
the moon. Is that what you said, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you were to show these photos to these flat earth believers, they'll come up with more a conspiracy theory stating that it's a Photoshop, it's green screen and all this nonsense. It's like I'm sorry to bring up the flat earth believers. You know, that might come across as irrelevant, but it just bugs me out how some people will believe such a bogus theory. It just it bugs me out, and I'm not even that knowledgeable when it comes to the field of science. But even I know that that's BS.
Hmm.
Well, that's
Yeah.
not the only one. There's also climate change denial, right? ExxonMobil, Chevron, they've known about, the devastating effects of it since like the 1970s. Just like cigarette companies knew that, cigarettes were poisonous, but they hid it.
Hmm.
So I guess there is some validity to you bringing it up because I've seen it also spreading, the anti-science. I don't know what you would call it, but I think you know what I mean.
Well,
Wow. So there are people that's denying climate change in the Earth.
yes,
They're in
Obvious.
Congress.
absolutely. No,
In the black community too. In the black community too, they throw out these these cliches as well. There's no such thing as climate change. Niggas always been hot.
wow.
Wow.
Well, I'll say this really quick. Our fearless leader is from the same city that I was born and raised in, and I remember up until up until '96
Hmm.
here in New York, we got snow from the end of October all the way to April. All right. So we would have trick or treat for Halloween, and the very next day or the very next week, we got snow.
Mm-hmm.
You would literally go 3 to 4 weeks on end. You literally wouldn't see the ground. There's so much snow and ice here in this city, all
Mm-hmm.
the way through to April. Now we don't see snow until January and
And that's once.
February. Right, correct. And February is the coldest month of the year now. All right, but just one last thing, with the flat Earth people, if you talk to them, they'll tell you how the Earth is flat. There's a 200 foot thick ice wall that surrounds the Earth. There's a firmament up so high above the sky that no one's ever actually left the atmosphere. Uh, the Earth does not rotate around the sun. The stars rotate around the Earth. I mean, bro, it gets absolutely crazy and mind-boggling. So you know what? I laugh at those people. I make fun of those people because they're absolute clowns.
Mm-hmm.
Luddites and any other term that you so choose to use. But for the global warming piece, yes, things change over time, but the climate has in fact changed. All right, the
Mm-hmm.
climate has changed, and to deny that and to deny the impact of fossil fuel emissions on that change is absolutely comical to me. However, when I look at the fact that who controls alternative energy exploration, the oil and gas industry, so they control the development and exploration of the very thing that potentially put them out of business. All
Mm-hmm.
right, the same way that the pharmaceutical industry controls cancer research. So they control the very thing that can potentially put them out of business. All right, so when you connect the dots, things begin to make sense to you.
All right, this next article is from Newsweek.com. Russia says Ukraine may no longer be a country soon. Russia's top security official has warned that neighboring Ukraine may no longer be a country soon, as the former Soviet republic is divided by competing interests. Beset by unrest since a 2014 political uprising ousted former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, Kyiv's successor government has accused Moscow of seizing the Crimean Peninsula in a disputed referendum and sponsoring an eastern insurgency. Nearly 5 years into the conflict, Russian Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev warned Tuesday that Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko's current pro-West strategy could lead to a total dismantling of the state. Quote, the U.S. administration actually controls the Kyiv authorities and Poroshenko personally. Even Ukrainian experts are skeptical of the 4-year work of Petro Poroshenko as head of state. The Kyiv authorities are doing everything to split Ukraine, implementing the West scenario for separating Ukraine from Russia while ignoring the interests of their own people. In the end, the country was effectively split, he added. The, the continuation of such a policy by the Kyiv authorities may contribute to Ukraine's loss of statehood. The U.S. has supplied Ukraine with military assistance and deployed advisors to help the country's armed forces and allied pro-government militias combat the rebels, which have declared the Donetsk and Lugansk regions, collectively known as Donbass, as independent people's republics. Despite President Donald Trump's vows to strengthen U.S.-Russia ties, which suffered after the annexation of Crimea, Washington has stepped up aid to Kiev and brought in sanctions against Moscow. The war has already killed up to 10,000 people since 2014. When the unrest began, when the unrest began, has largely been looked in a stalemate. But a recent incident prompted new fears Ukraine and Russia would soon engage in direct fighting. Warships of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, based in Crimea, fired on and seized 3 Ukrainian naval vessels along with their crew in November and accusing them of violating maritime law as they sailed through disputed Kerch Strait. Poroshenko demanded Moscow release the sailors and repeatedly warned that an all-out war was imminent as Russia moved new defense weapons systems to Crimea. Though no conflict ensued, Moscow's Lefortovsky District Court extended Tuesday that on Tuesday the detainment of at least 8 of the 24 Ukrainian sailors for another 3 months. The state-run TASS Russian news agency reported. As at least 3 of the detained sailors were seen confessing in footage broadcast shortly after the incident in November. So what's happening here is that they can't enforce, they being the capital of Ukraine, can't enforce their constitution on the people of Lugansk and Donetsk, because the people are not they're Russian speakers for one, and two, they've banned Russian as a language. So now your country is basically an apartheid state, and the ideas that this Poroshenko guy has is that if he can crush the eastern region where the Russian speaking people are, then he can actually retain power of the state and actually join NATO in the EU. The only thing is that the European Union doesn't even want the Ukraine in there because Ukraine is a basket case. They can't even pay their own bills.
Wow. Wow.
And keep in mind that they owe Russia a lot of money because they get all their heat from Russia. Their heat and their energy from Russia.
Mm-mm-mm. So, if you ban a language that the eastern part of your country speaks, you're just keeping the country torn, which will send the country further and further down to failure.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's a bad idea. That's a bad thing. And what I guess they don't produce their own resources, or in order to get all this heat from all this energy from other countries. I mean, do they produce their own resources?
I would say not. Um, they're very good at military arms and nuclear energy. The only problem is all their nuclear scientists have ran to China about a year or so ago.
Well, they might as well join Russia then. you know.
Yeah, Putin said in a comment last year that if Ukraine joins NATO, then that means war. So that means that he's going to retaliate immediately. And he said that it only take them 2 weeks to take out Ukraine.
Well, to speak to something that Wacky just said, the only way, historically speaking, what Wacky was just speaking on, out, banning a language of half your country or at least one third of your country, unless you're trying to do basically a form of ethnic cleansing and trying to permanently establish your power through removing any and all history and culture of the people in that region, then that works. Not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying, historically speaking, that strategy works under those conditions. But if you lack the resources to implement that, you lack the ability to feed your soldiers, to feed the people there. You lack any human capital. You lack what it needs to maintain long-term dominance and maintenance of that strategy. It's going to fall apart. and apparently that's what's happening.
Mhm. I know.
Uh, I don't know what Ukraine is doing. Uh, month 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 and a half ago, they attacked a Russian frigate. They got stopped. Well, they. I, I, okay, you get all your energy from Russia, then you
Mhm.
attack Russia. So obviously, Russia's not going to let that slide. So now you got to pay more because you have different factions of your political party, either for Russia or against Russia. So for Russia political party comes into power, the price of the oil goes down. When the anti-Russian political party comes into power, prices go up. So you got conflict there. Then you want to phase out a language that millions of people speak. I think, you know what? I just think they're the next North Korea.
Yeah, and the thing is that Poroshenko is doing this now so he can secure his bid for the elections on March 31st. So of this year. So he has about maybe a month and a half to secure his ranks. And the thing is, he's so low in the polls. I think he's only polling at like 8% or something like that. There's a woman who's actually who has the highest polling percentage in the country for president. I don't know anything about her, but she seems to be very much liked at this point. Um, and he's going to have a hard time securing his seat in presidency. Um, but he's doing all of this to justify that. Oh well, Russia is acting provocative, so therefore, if they don't turn back our sailors, if they don't give us back our sailors, then that means war. But the thing is, Ukraine is in no position to be in the war because their military has been split. Half of it went to the Russian speaking ones went to the east, and the other half, is pretty ragtag militia. They're basically far right groups. We know that Steve Bannon, former advisor to Donald Trump, President Trump, actually has been in the Ukraine maybe a few months ago, organizing far right groups. Sloboda. Sloboda is basically a Nazi party in Ukraine.
Well, Mike, I'm just throwing this out there.
Mhm.
Just throwing it out there. There is a old political theory for why state leaders do certain things. It's better to appear incompetent than to appear impotent. All right. So he may not necessarily have the control and support of all factions of his government. So better to do things like that are provocative and evocative than to show that he doesn't have the political support within his own ranks.
Mhm.
Again, just throwing it out there, throwing that out there.
Anti-gravity, everything you want to add to that? He's away right now. All right, this one is from France 24. France summons Italian envoy after DiMaggio's unacceptable Africa comments. The ambassador was summoned on Monday after, quote, unacceptable and groundless comments by Di Maio on Sunday. A source in the cabinet of France's Europe minister, Nathalie Lousseau, told AFP on Monday of anonymity. Di Maio made a series of incendiary remarks while visiting Abruzzo's region in central Italy. The, the latest sign of serious tensions between the populist governments in Rome and France, centrist leader Emmanuel Macron. Quote, the EU should sanction France in all countries like France that impoverish Africa and make these people leave because Africans should be in Africa, not at all, not at the bottom of the Mediterranean. De Maio said, if people are leaving today, it's because European countries, France above all, have never stopped colonizing dozens of countries, African countries. Added the leader of the Five Star Movement, M5S, which governs alongside the far right League Party. The International Organization for Migration said at the weekend that more than 100 people were feared missing after a boat carrying migrants capsized off the coast of Libya, Italy's closest ports. The Italian Navy flew three survivors to the Mediterranean island of Lampedusa. Italy has closed its ports to rescue boats operated by charities in the Mediterranean under a new hardline approach to immigration. After making comments criticizing the Italian government and its approach to immigration last year, Macron and the French government have since largely avoided entering into a war of words with Rome. But relations between the two capitals, usually close EU allies, have deteriorated since M5S League coalition became the European Union's first populist-only government in June last year. De Maio and fellow Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini from the League Party recently backed, quote, yellow vest protesters who have been demonstrating against Macron's government since November. So, I know.
I'm going to guess and say the reason he's saying is because when Africans come across the Mediterranean, the closest and nearest stop for them in a country that they can quickly settle in and receive a better life is Italy. And they're seeing this influx of Africans, and they don't like that. So what he's saying is, hey, what you're France to France, what you're doing in Africa is harming us because they want to escape what you're doing and come to Europe, and we're their first stop, and we're getting run over. So it's like, yeah. I'm gonna leave it at that. That's what I think.
Anti-gravity?
So when I first saw this, I thought it was hilarious. I think officially relations in the EU are starting to deteriorate. Obviously, like Lionel said, they just don't want immigrants in their country, period. So they'll say what they got to say. But at the same time, it's factual. And this really is rubbing Macron and the French just in general, the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll see how it turns out. But when you see the two poorest countries in Europe, in the EU, teaming up, Italy and Poland, and recently they added Hungary, the divisions are starting to become more pronounced.
Mm-hmm. Paul Bryant.
Well, uh, I come over here a lot, you know, sitting in Germany right now as we speak, and there has been a large influx of Africans into several European states. There have been a lot of problems, for lack of a better term. Uh, there's been some growing pains, some transitional issues, crime, drugs, a lot of problems. So it's an issue that is rubbing some people the wrong way. So how these things play out, but I think anti-gravity also touched on something. The poorest states now feel, hey, listen, we are the poorest states. What have we got to lose? So they're speaking out. They're seeking some sort of alliances. When you have nothing to lose, you start speaking out, and you start doing things that you haven't done before. So
Mhm.
a lot of moving parts. We'll see how things play out. To me, right now, there's too much smoke to really make any predictions as far as what's going on. Can form ideas, can make statements, but me personally, I'm just going to fold my arms, sit back, and take a wait and see attitude for now.
Wacky.
Well, I'm assuming, like any country that has a high rate of immigration, whether legal or illegally, it's an increase of population, which which thus results in uh increase of homelessness, increase of unemployment because there's only so much people that a certain country can take care of as far as providing employment, providing shelter, and what have you. So when you have a increase of population, thus an increase of unemployment, an increase of, you know, homelessness, that gives room for an increase of crime. And I'm assuming that Italy is going through that, and mixed with the fact that they're going through a very bad economy. So they're finally speaking out, you know. But when they speaking out about France uh, and them causing a lot of Africans to, migrate to Europe, it's a very obvious comment, and people have known that in the back of their minds for decades. So it's like it's like Italy stating the obvious, but I mean, what is the EU going to do? To me, I just think that the EU is probably not going to give a shit.
Mhm.
I'm just stating. I don't know. It's just in the back of my mind, but
Mhm.
uh, and France is like France is have much more power, much more say so in the political world than Italy.
Mhm.
So France would have a lot more support from the international community based upon their stance against Italy.
Mhm.
So I think that even though Italy is in the right as far as what they're saying, but I don't think that Italy will go won't go anywhere as far as resolution to their problem because they don't have as much power and say so in the political world as France.
Well,
So
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I cut you off.
Oh no, I'm done. I'm done. I'm finished. Go ahead.
Um, I tend to look at France in general as also being duplicitous because France is a former African colonial power. Not as
It's still a colonial power.
you know what? You're right. You're right. So I tend to take anything that France says along those lines as duplicitous. All right. So that's pretty much where I'm at on that. So also, and France to this day is still making Haiti pay for their independence, for having the nerve to want to take the French boot off of their neck. So anything France has to say along these lines, I find is comical to me and duplicitous in the utmost degree. So that's where I'm at with that.
Well,
And oh, I'm sorry, man. May I say something as a
go for it.
fellow Haitian? I,
Go ahead.
I do not like France. Okay, even though what I just said, but I can't stand France as far as what I see and do to my parents' country. Nah, I can't stand France. But at the end of the day, you know, power talks and bullshit walks. You know, unfortunately.
Yeah, what I was just going to actually bring up Haiti. I think what's happening in Africa right now. Um, I think we talked about this maybe a few months ago on the Brain Trust, one of the geopolitics hangouts. Italy actually hosted the Libyan um, peace talks, and you had several countries that did not want to attend, including France, because Italy was hosting it. And so Italy has been trying to reintegrate themselves into Africa through a peace initiative, working with the Libyan government, and then working in a couple other areas through automotive and other engineering feats to certain countries in Africa. So they see the franco, the currency that they use in Africa as a bit problematic to do business in that area, because French colonialism and French capitalism is actually the rule of the day down there in those areas. So I wouldn't be surprised if British intelligence is actually helping to break apart some of these francophone areas, including Cameroon. That was you have one half of the country or 2/3 of the country that speaks French, and then you have 1/3 that speaks English. I wouldn't be surprised if the British are there, causing a ruckus and trying to break apart Cameroon. Same thing in some of these some of these other places where the terrorism is happening in France's sphere of influence. I wouldn't be surprised if you have Americans and French and Chinese intelligence trying to break up those areas. I know that there's been Chinese contractors from Huawei and ZTE being killed out in Africa in francophone areas. So there's a whole lot of moving parts happening right now in terms of France's economic stability. I mean, there's no real reason as to why you have these people protesting with yellow vests about the conditions of low wages while they still rob Africa at the same time. France should be sitting pretty right now, but according to these yellow vests, they're not. And if France is still plundering all the wealth out of Africa, and you still have people who are dissatisfied, and you have high homeless rates and things like that, or growing amount of homeless rates, it sounds like this could be the next Brexit. After March, when the British decide to exit out, I think that France will probably be the next one to leave out, because they've overplayed their hand, in Italy, Poland, Hungary, Portugal, and Ireland. These other countries are looking at the European Union and saying, this doesn't really work for me. I don't really like it. They don't like colonialism. So they're getting a dose of the same medicine that Africans have been getting for a long, long time, and they're saying, well, we don't like this either. So they'll do anything to back up Africans, to overthrow the French government in its colonialist adventures in Africa. And this is the perfect time for Haitian Americans to actually speak on behalf of Haitians, because Haitians can't get their word out in the same way that Haitian Americans can, because they don't have that same access to media. This is the perfect time for Haitians to lawyer up and actually, use social media to protest and say, oh, it's not just African colonialism that France has their hands in, but it's also, back payment that they owe Haiti. They owe Haiti, I think, something like $30 billion right now. That the court had awarded them. So this is the perfect time for Haitians to actually mobilize on social media and actually put that content out there.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea.
Yeah, excellent point, Mike. Excellent point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if I could just add one thing, Paul was mentioning earlier, there was a lot of African migrants in Europe, and they're having certain problems and growing pains because of it. Honestly, I have no sympathy for them, the European countries, I should say, because Libya was the corkscrew, right, for Africa. It's not like these people didn't want to go to Europe before. It's just that Gaddafi was, kind of the wall, so to speak, between Europe and mass migration. And so when they overthrew him, primarily the French and the U.S., they opened up this can of worms. So, they reap what they sow. And a lot of these, so-called Francophone African countries, if any of them, break away from France, they're royally screwed because that's like the majority of their funding. That's how they issue the debt
Well,
to
You
fund
you
their
say
government.
you say they're screwed?
France, yes.
Oh, you mean France? I thought you meant the African, the African colonized states.
No, 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 not them. The France, because that's their money makers.
They also get uranium out of Mali, if I remember correctly. So they are that's where they get their energy from. So
well, excuse me, I didn't make mention of that for any other reason that to just state what's going on in Europe. I really don't take any position either way. I was just stating that to what the current situation is. But you
Oh no,
absolutely,
no, definitely, I agree.
you know, yeah. I don't feel much. I don't feel. I don't feel sympathy per se for what's going on. I think it's a case of you know, case of the chickens coming home to roost. It's funny how these geopolitical states, they do things, and then whether they feel the repercussions directly or other nations feel the repercussions, and then they choose to just wipe their hands of what happens. You know, so I find that very very interesting.
Macron knows that what's going on, because remember we covered an article I think last month where they said he said that he was willing to give Africa back its artifacts in Benin and Togo and those areas, in those francophone areas. And the British on the other hand are saying no, but the French, at least Macron is saying, yeah, maybe we should give back these artifacts, but if you do that, then 80% of your museum would be empty. So slowly but surely, the onion is starting to peel, and Macron is starting to lose grip, and I don't think he may win after next year's elections.
Well,
Um,
Mike, it's funny you say that because sometime in the early 2000s, I went to the I went out to the Brooklyn Museum because the Museum of England was having a 2 year global tour, and the 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 London Museum was having a 2 year global tour of their entire um, Egypt exhibition. Everything that's in the archives, the London Museum, the Royal Museum, all of it. So it's funny how, to speak on what you just said, how Macron said France is willing to give all of these things back. The UK is like, ba ba fangul. They don't want to do that, because if they do that, a substantial part of what people go to the Royal Museum in London, a large fraction of that is going to be going now. So,
And it wouldn't even just go to Africans. They hold the crown jewel of India in their British museum. So the Indians are fighting for that as well.
I did not know that. That's interesting.
they have a
And,
lot of
and
artifacts from Asia as well. That Vietnam wants some of the artifacts back as well.
if you think about it, if the British does decide to give back a lot of their things that they took from Africa, they might fear that maybe their tourism money might decrease.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely.
yeah,
Hmm.
because London, the city of London itself, it looks like New York makes a killing off of tourism,
Hmm.
and I don't think any city, especially international cities that make a lot of money off of tourism, want to risk that. Unfortunately,
As
You know what pushed this agenda was Black Panther. When Michael B. Jordan's part, his character was the one who pointed that out, and that sent off a lot of alarm bells around the world. Was like, maybe we should get our artifacts back from these people.
yeah.
mm, think so, Mike.
What was that?
Do you think so? That really sparked this current interest?
Yeah, that was a big topic last year when
Mm,
Black Panther came out. Because when it came out in the theaters in Europe, that was like, oh, and there was an epiphany around Europe. Maybe we should give these people back their stuff
Interesting. Interesting
because
because
because a lot of Africans when they saw the movie in Africa, they was like, yeah, this makes sense. So like you have these millennial Africans who are looking at this and saying, this is the first step for us, right? Let's make a move on this. But some people were speculating that the Chinese were pushing a lot of a lot of these ideas. I don't think the Chinese really care too much one way or another personally, but I wouldn't say that they would not do this, but um I do remember vividly that when Black Panther did come out, that discussion came out, and a lot of American museums were basically kind of safeguarding themselves, saying, "I don't know if we really agree with this."
As a matter of fact, it's funny that you mentioned that, Mike, about how when the time Black Panther came out, a lot of people came out. A lot of people in Africa was speaking about that because around that time, that's when I was seeing news clippings all up and down my Facebook timeline of young Africans interviewing in BBC news studios and talking about that yes, we deserve to get our artifacts back from Great Britain and France and what have you. But the only way something like that could actually work out is if the African countries and countries in the Middle East and Asia come together and rally as one, and use social media to rally up the people around the world, and also go to the UN and rally them up and convince the world, international world, that hey, listen, we need our artifacts back.
well, that's an interesting point because I've always said that our archaeologists say that they're scientists and they're researchers, but what they really are, they're grave robbers. Okay, and I look at Zahi Hawass, who was in charge of Egypt's basically his Egypt's he was the head of Egypt's historical society, head of their museums, and he was the gatekeeper of all archaeological and scientific research of the Great Pyramids and of the entire Giza Plateau. And he was not the one who banned Cheikh Anta Diop from returning back to the country, but he was the gatekeeper for ensuring that no one will ever perform any more DNA tests on the mummies when he proved that they were in fact African, that they did not look like Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, that they look like, you know, uh, Mike and Lionel, you know. So it's funny how um, the country of Egypt of is remaining silent in all this, and it's funny how you know museums as a whole, especially in the former African colonial powers, France, Belgium, England, how their museums would change, not just with Africa, but any of the other nations whose riches that they've plundered over the centuries.
Mhm. And these things are worth trillions of dollars at this point. You're talking about hitting their pocketbooks really hard. I mean, this is beyond reparations.
Way beyond reparations. Some of these things are absolutely priceless.
Because now they would have to reconstruct their whole entire society based on the history books that they've written and the artifacts that they've taken. They would have to reinvent their whole entire society just based on the thievery and admit, because to give it back means that you've admitted that you're a thief. And
Correct.
Right. Exactly.
what are you gonna say, anti gravity?
No, no, go ahead. I'll go after you.
No, I was done.
Yeah, because like I said, I've always maintained, bro, archaeologists are 9/10 grave robbers, only 1/10 uh, scientists.
Right. I think I see in the future, if there's a strong African country that, comes up, they're going to start hiring people to rob the, British Museum of History and these French museums, and then, either by hiring robbers to fence it back to them, or buying it on at auctions. But one way or another, they're gonna have to get all this stuff back.
Well, that's funny because I do remember that Israel, Israel at some point hired people whose job was to go around all the countries of Europe and South America to track down things that were stolen by the Nazis, both
Yeah.
assets, belongings, jewelry, gold, cash, paintings. You know, there were things that were hanging in the Louvre Museum that Hitler himself had sent over there that were stolen from um, Jewish people, and there were things that were taken from the Louvre Museum again that belonged to Jewish people. So I bring that up in that I find it interesting how Israel did it, but yet there seems to be resistance to returning things taken from African states.
But they didn't want to give it back either, right? That's
True.
why they had to put either stealing or buying or putting immense amounts of public pressure to having it returned. The framing it, oh, this was taken the Holocaust from this person's mom's wall, even if that may or may not be the case.
You're right, but it's funny to me how there's always been this statement that the ADL, the Anti Defamation League, they're not they're not about anti-Semitism because is real because basically at the end of the day, any person who Israel feels is their enemy, they're going to call you an anti-Semite.
Mhm.
All right, so that's another conversation for another day. But it speaks to what you just said, and anti-gravity.
But one of the ways Israel was able to do this was able to get go around different parts of the world and get their assets back, or what they feel that their assets back is that the Jewish people have been able to win the hearts and minds of the international community,
Media campaign.
media. Yeah, the media. So
True.
I'm saying African people or black people should do the same thing, especially now when it's easier because we have social media, which is now almost, you could say, is looking like it's replacing mainstream media. So the power of propaganda is, is something that could be used to your defense. So
Yeah,
that's what I have to say.
I think Ryan Coogler did an excellent job with Black Panther highlighting that notion, and which is how that conversation really came about. Um, and now, I mean, if he was ever to do another Black Panther, I think he's doing the next Black Panther. He can kind of push that envelope again. And I think what Black Panther did in that regard is it kind of spoon fed, anti-racism, uh, 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 um, protein pellets, to the audience, and now you have white people who are sitting in these audiences enjoying all of the blackness on screen, but then when you have to decipher some of the scenes, and you're like, maybe we are thieves, because there's a woman on RT named Max Kaiser's wife actually said this last summer, and she said that she didn't know anything about the Native Americans because she's from Connecticut. She said she didn't know anything about the Native Americans until
Mhm.
she was in her 30s, because a lot of the information wasn't in textbooks, and she
Wait,
said that she it turned her red pill.
time out, time out. Is she unaware that the state of Connecticut is named after the Connecticut Indians?
Exactly.
Holy sh! Well, you know what? You know what? I shouldn't even say that, given that people don't actually study history, especially in this country more so than in Europe. But you know what, Mike? I wanted to touch on something because uh, Michael B. Jordan's character in the movie Black Panther said something that I found interesting. I was I was I was not expecting to hear his characters say that. At the end of the movie, he looks at the Black Panther. He says, "Look, listen, you're still my cousin. We can save you. We can heal you. You are still royalty." And Michael B. Jordan's character looked at the Black Panther and he said, "What? So I can live the rest of my life in your jail? Absolutely not. I want to. You know what? Let me die and throw me in the ocean so I can be with the rest of my African ancestors who died on the way over. We have the ability to exert power and influence all around the world, and you don't want to use it. And whether you agree with it or not, whether I agree with it or not, I kind of tend to see the validity of his argument. I was surprised that Ryan Coogler put that into the movie,
Mm-hmm.
is what I'm trying to say. I was like, wow, okay, I didn't think he was really going to go there, but he put it in the movie. And if that alone is going to spark a conversation, then you know what? Big up, big ups to him.
Mm-hmm. Lionel, you have anything you want to add? Anti-gravity?
Oh, yeah, okay. Lionel's up there. I guess let me just add that to what Paul Bryan's saying. I definitely agree. I think there was Mike made a good point that there's different levels to it. You know, just kind of how it's put together as a movie. You know, the visuals, the cinematics of it was really excellent. So it drew a lot of people, at least in that aspect. But I think a lot of the underlying stuff went over most people's heads that weren't, black or African, which I have to give Ryan Coogler, a lot of credit to him for that,
Mm-hmm.
because that's why it kind of resonated so much with, black people here in the U.S. and across the world,
Mm-hmm.
because they saw what a lot of the white audience didn't see.
And can I say something since I was speaking about Black Panther?
Yes, sir.
Uh, Based upon Paul's point, if you look at the film, after the credits was over, in the Marvel movies, after the credits is over, then you see a little, outro, right? So the outro in Black Panther, after, Killmonger died, you see T'Challa going and visiting Oakland,
Mm-hmm.
which is, according to the movie, his cousin Killmonger's city that he was born and raised in. He's going to, the inner city of Oakland, seeing the young black children. So what Ryan Coogler was trying to put is how Killmonger influenced T'Challa, because T'Challa kind of woke up and said, you know what? This guy's right.
Mm-hmm.
Or he made a good point.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like one of those things where I think, like, they say the warrior code, how warriors, even though they kill and beat each other, but then they still have like your enemy still have some sort of influence on you, because you realize that they made some sort of a good point. So that was powerful to me. That was powerful. Yeah.
Right,
Well,
but that's also history where African Americans influenced a lot of the independence of Africa, right? Particularly, even the Haitian Revolution was basically the end of slavery, both in Africa and in the Americas, for the most part. So I think maybe that was a hidden message to the Africans have to wake up, and I feel like maybe they kind of are at you know at this time.
Yeah, I think there's a divide between generations, right? I think the baby boomer Africans seem to be a lot more crudish um, than your millennials. Or maybe it might be the other way around, because I do see a lot of African women chasing pale faces a lot. Um,
you better watch out, Mike. There's going to be a 10-hour hangout devoted to what you just said.
about what?
I'm just being facetious and taking shots at these dudes with
Mm.
their 10-hour hangouts about absolute nonsense. But
No,
um,
but what I'm saying is, I think there's a division in how who sees the better future for Africa? Because is it the baby boomers who want to retain power inside these African countries, or is it the millennials who are coming up now, like the dude in Uganda? Was it Uganda? Um, the rapper. I forget his name right now.
Hmm.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I forget
But
his
you
name.
see him, but you see him using hip hop to challenge the leadership, right? And they don't really, they don't really have an absolute response because the demographics in Africa are so different now than what it was before. I think over 50% of the population are millennials.
Well,
Right.
to speak to what you just said, Mike. One of the problems that I personally had, um, I'm in my mid 40s, so I'm Generation X. All right, so I am the child. I'm the generation after the baby boomers. Right. My daughter is a millennial. So one of the problems I had with Jesse Jackson and those of his ilk and those of his time, they wanted to just stay in power and stay in power and hold on to the reins of power and never wanted to groom anyone to keep anything going, you know. And that's one of the biggest problems that I personally have with the baby boomer generation. They were more interested in keeping things the way they were instead of moving things forward and growing. Because anything organically over time has to grow and evolve and change. They never wanted to change and grow, evolve, and change. It was still coming from a place of victimhood, victimization. Like, okay, fine, but over time, then you have to change. As the times change, you have to change and evolve and grow. And even now, I still don't see that evolution and that growth and change. So um, if younger, if the youth, want to come up and effect change, and if maybe not necessarily go in the opposite direction, but go in a different direction, okay, to organically grow and change, I see that as a wholeheartedly good thing, right? You may not necessarily agree with where the youth are going, but you have to have conversations. You have to have diversity of thought. You have to be willing to think outside the box and go in new and different directions. And I see that the baby boomer generation, they are extremely resistant and hesitant towards doing anything different than what they've known.
Right. That's kind of the parallel I saw. Um, is the same thing in Africa. The older generation, they don't really have much interest in, I guess, reaching out to a lot of the diaspora Africans. They want to keep whatever, I guess, normalcy they have in their countries as preferred to, making any changes. But for the younger generation, definitely it's much different. I guess that's why I'm more optimistic than you, Paul, on this front because you could see this from the rapper turned politician in Uganda. That I think he's currently still in prison, if I'm not mistaken. He's a
I thought he got
political
released.
prisoner. Did he get released?
Yeah, I thought he got
Okay.
released to go serve in office.
Well,
All right,
Okay.
guys.
Yeah.
I'm gonna. Sorry to interrupt. I'm gonna have to go. I'm gonna have to call it a night. So, this was a great hangout. Y'all have a good night. All right.
Yes, sir.
All right,
Thank you.
man.
All right.
Have a good night.
and to gravity, it's not so much that I wouldn't say, you know what, I guess, after my personal experiences and as a student of history combined with my experiences and everything that I've gone through, I'm more pragmatic now.
Mhm.
So it's not that it's not that I don't it's not that I'm the reason the reason I'm not as optimistic as you are is I'm pragmatic. I'm not negative. It's just I'm pragmatic. I'm very much
Right.
okay. All right, there's change. There's potential for change. Just given the history, I don't see it happening anytime soon. There's certain things I need to see before I become optimistic. All right. So whereas
Right.
you are optimistic, and even Mike and Lionel are optimistic, I have to admit there have been things that the three of you have opened my eyes to. Okay, because I'm not negative. I'm just pragmatic. So I need to see
Right.
certain things in place before I become more optimistic.
No, definitely that's fair. But I guess the biggest reasons I would be optimistic, where I am optimistic about it, is because there's been, at least from what I can see, a mind shift change that's distinct among the younger Africans to a lot of the post-independence Africans.
Mm,
Uh,
okay.
I see that mind shift change, generationally, and then also, I guess it's somewhat coincidental, is the global economic environment has shifted as well. The socio-economic, political, global environment is shifting. So that creates opportunity where France and Europe are waning, China is rising, other parts of Asia, India. So that I see that as the opportunity. That's, I guess, in a kind of a concise way, why I'm more optimistic.
Okay.
But yeah, that's all I'd say.
Yeah, and I think there's also a shift in economies as well, right? Before, wealth was kind of calcified at the top, and now you're starting to see some of it trickle down, and you're starting to see this uh, scale out sort of economics for Africans now. So now before Africans, the idea of African having a cell phone or any form of technology was unheard of. Now you're starting to see just about everybody on the continent have some form of technology, first world technology to themselves, leveraging that technology to actually earn a living or even protest.
One of the things that is of interest to me is the tech startups, the IT startups that you guys highlight here on the Brain Trust, and also the scientists and inventors that you guys were talking about the other day, which is not the first time that you guys have brought them up. You have consistently, at least to my knowledge, brought them up. So I have to admit, pleasantly surprised to see that. I personally find that encouraging. Even for a pragmatist like myself, I find that encouraging because that's something that I see in place can lead to a higher degree of optimism from someone like myself.
This is actually open mic, so we can bring up anything else. I wish I could find the article that Anti-Gravity was commenting on about Latinos being more Muslim now. I think Manel might have said that.
I am at this point going to recuse myself for a while
That was definitely an interesting YouTube. I think it was a Vice video, actually.
because I can take this conversation some very interesting places. Some people are definitely not prepared for. So I'm going to listen to what you just have to
Flat Earther.
say. My man.
Anti-Gravity, you have anything you want to add to that?
Not currently. I had an article earlier I had planned, but I forgot where I put it.
Mm-hmm.
Can't find the link right now. So whatever you guys want to talk about, it's fine.
Are you saying that that article fell off the edge of the earth?
We can't go there though. So it was at the ice fields or whatever you call it.
Yeah, the ice wall that surrounds the flat Earth. These guys out of their flipping minds.
Now, what do you guys think about Trump denying Nancy Pelosi a flight to see the soldiers?
I find that
Oh,
comical. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no. I think we should talk about the government shutdown. Actually, that was the article I
Okay,
wanted to bring up. But go ahead.
go ahead.
I'll go after you, Paul.
I find that comical because The president may be the commander in chief, but I didn't know the president has the authority to bar U.S. citizens or members of Congress from visiting U.S. military. As far as I know, any member of the U.S. government has the authority to visit any U.S. military installation, regardless of security clearance, and they have to be read in. I will check that with my subject matter experts, but I find that comical. Um, Tit for
Well,
tat.
there's a lot of things that we learned too, like when Nancy Pelosi kind of basically barred the president from coming to Congress, and she can enforce it with the sergeant of arms because she controls the sergeant of arms. That I didn't even know before.
I thought the president was in control of the armed services, though.
The
Uh,
sergeant at arms is different.
yeah, the
He's
sergeant.
he's
Oh,
kind of.
I'm sorry.
Oh no, what? You
Yeah,
probably know more than on this
yeah.
one.
He's a part of the Senate police, I believe. If I'm using the exact term, because I actually met a guy who that's his job. That's what he does. They're not a part of the U.S. military for exactly that reason. Part of that whole separation of powers BS.
Right, and actually another, um, I guess, not so much discussed power of Congress is that they can subpoena people to come and testify, and if they refuse, they can send the sergeant of arms to arrest them and put them in a. There's a prison underneath the Congress, one of the Congress buildings, where they can hold them.
Including the President of the United States, because if anyone remembers,
Correct. Right.
William William Jefferson Clinton was subpoenaed in order to appear before the Congress for his impeachment hearing, which he was impeached in one branch of the House. He was not impeached in the other, which I maintain Donald Trump will never be impeached because it sets a precedent, and that precedent, from their standpoint, can never be set because instability at the very top of your nation points to instability and weakness in your nation, which is one of the reasons why England appears so weak because England has gone through 4 prime ministers in the past 8 years.
Right. Also, that, and if he's removed, there'll be 30% of the country that will forever think that there was a coup against their leader. So that's the beginnings of real political violence in the U.S.
Yeah, which is not gonna happen. And I know people have hangout after hangout and video after video, and there's endless news on CNN and all these other talking head garbage mainstream media. That's never gonna happen. That's all uh, public consumption. That's not going to happen here. I you cannot convince me otherwise. Again, historically speaking,
Right.
I do not see that happening. That is public consumption. Because as people keep talking about that, to get back to government shutdown, there is something that is staring people in the face and no one is talking about. This is not a government shutdown. This is a partial shutdown. If there ever
Hmm.
was a true government shutdown, there would be chaos and anarchy in this country. This is a partial shutdown. Okay.
Right.
Now, that distinction may sound like splitting hairs. It's not hairs. It is of monumental importance to understand what's really going on here. This is all a game. Um, this whole DACA and the wall back and forth, that's part of it. But for me, my take on it, it harkens back to what happened in 2000 when Baby Bush was elected into the White House. This is about restructuring. We
Hmm.
saw a restructuring in 2000 when Baby Bush got into office. We saw a restructuring in 1980 when Ronnie was elected into office, who conservatives still call the greatest American president since FDR. I don't see how that boggles my mind, but
Well,
Well,
that's their culture leader. They sacrifice a goat to Ronald Reagan's grave before they can become a Republican nominee for president.
uh,
But I guess just to speak to the government shutdown, this is what I wanted to bring up earlier: is that even though this is a partial government shutdown, there one, this puts a lot of political pressure on both the president and Congress, but there's like a lot of real world implications that come with it in terms of, I believe it was uh, Jack who sent the article about the FBI and the courts no longer being able to, either subpoena. There's going to be future background clearance, security clearance problems for all these agents who are now going to go through, hardships. That opens them up to being corrupted, and the economic impact of it is starting to show. The stock market is fine, but contrary to what a lot of people think, the stock market is not the economy. So a lot of other areas, are going to be affected. I believe there is not a survey, but a report that came out that there's going to be about a 0.5% shaving off of the GDP for this quarter because of the government shutdown. What do you think about the implications? Or what do you guys think about these implications?
Hey, Scholar Shane, how are you?
Hey, how you guys doing?
Good, bro.
Good
Good.
man.
Yeah.
Um, Coming from my history and background, I tend to disassociate what happens at the New York Stock Exchange with everything else because it's not what people tend to think it is. So that's all I'll say on that. It's not the direct reflection that most people tend to think that it is.
Mhm.
What about you, Mike?
In reference to point 0.5 GDP being shaved off.
I guess more broadly, the economic impact that it's already having on the economy and how that'll, possibly set us up for a recession and earlier than we were going to get it.
Well, we're actually late for a recession, right? So the last recession was what 2008, and it's what 2019. So we're probably about 6 7 months off from where we should have been.
We're actually a few years off because historically, the economy of this country runs on a 7 year cycle, historically speaking. And historically speaking, that 7 year cycle was actually interrupted post the 2008 economic crisis because if you retrace that 7 year cycle, 2007, 2008 was 7 years removed from the prior downturn. So 2007, 2008 plus seven brings us to where? So we're actually a few years past where we should have been. So we're playing with, we're way past what historically should have been an economic downturn to this economy. So you know, I you know, for the lack of a better term, man, I'm not convinced about anything. This country is ripe for an economic downturn. This country is ripe for a full blown recession. Um, and it could actually, this country is actually ripe for a severe economic recession, which is what Japan saw in the late 80s, early 90s.
I always thought that was artificially designed, though,
What?
or their downturn in the economy.
Oh, the 7 year cycle?
Yeah. No, no, no. Japan's downturn.
Oh. Funny you say that. There were grumblings about that was manufactured by U.S. oligarchs before that even became a term, but because they were having issues with the economic power of the pound and the Japanese yen. So yeah, there could be some validity to that argument because technically, if you really look close, Japan never really fully recovered. It's like Japan just kind of coped and developed a new normal. They never really um, got back to the highs in economic strength pre 89 90. So I mean, some economists bring it up every now and again, but they kind of pretty get shut down quickly
Hmm.
when they make mention of that.
Yes, I mean, if we're a few years off, then the last article we read last week on the Hangout on the economics Hangout was that they were talking in reference to Africa that there's a global recession that's coming by 2020.
Well, there was a saying on Wall Street. Every now and again, every now and again, a little pain is good. That it helps to shake things up and clean everything out, and it provides a soft reset.
Hmm.
So even as far as that goes, that's it's kind of planned for and somewhat built into the system, for lack of a better term.
Oh no, definitely, it's built into the system. There's a whole branch of economics that deals with the business cycle. That's kind of the function of the Federal Reserve to a certain extent is to
No, it's
shave off
not.
a little bit from the top
No, it's not. It's
and
really
then
not.
prevent it going from too low.
No, it's not. You know what? Well, okay, okay. Yes and no. Yes and no, but that's more a function of J.P. Morgan and J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Carnegie, their descendants maintaining a hold on their investment, which is their privately owned bank, which is the Federal Reserve. That's what that is. So
No,
yes, you're
you
partially
make a
right.
solid. No, no, you're right. You're right. But I meant more so as in, uh, the business cycle is kind of assumed to be a natural occurrence, but it's to a certain extent is really not. On one side, yes, there are economic booms and economic busts, but for it to be, you know, so cyclical in the way that it is artificially stoked. Definitely.
Well, Adam Smith said that the way capitalism works as designed, there's going to be a 7 year cycle. So is that by design or is it just by happenstance of the reality of how the system works? I don't know. There is manipulation to the system. Absolutely. That's why JP Morgan and his cronies created the Federal Reserve. It's a privately owned bank to take the US off of the gold standard, and they literally own the gold. But yeah, so that's pretty much where that's at. How much of that again is happenstance by creation of the system? There is manipulation of the system. So now, in this day and age, how much of it is the manipulation? How much of it is the happenstance by design? That's anyone's guess.
So between 1945 and 19 what 73 was that the last meltdown between those
The
years?
the major meltdown, the last major meltdown was 73, 73 to 75. Major meltdown.
Right. So you had that was beyond 7 years between 1945 and 73.
Right, but yeah, but major meltdown and downturn are two different things. See,
Okay.
so that 7 year cycle means that the country goes into a downturn, doesn't go into a recession. Recessions are different from a downturn. Recessions tend to happen within a downturn,
Mhm.
or a recession will take the place of that downturn, which will be within that historic 7 year cycle.
Scholar Chang, you have anything you want to add?
Well, I think earlier, I believe was I forgot one gentleman in the panel mentioned about how stock market does not reflect economy. I agree. I think stock market only reflects, because what the stock market really is what in indices, right? In the indices of the performance of what the depends on which indices that we use and so forth. So that's why whenever I'm looking at all these statistics about GDP, GNP, and all these so forth, I don't really pay a lot of attention to them unless I'm, like I said, pure coming from the pure economist point of view. Because no matter how GNP, GDP growth and all these indicate how those indicator reveal, they never really reveal the actual conditions of, let's say, the working class and the lower class. They always tend to reflect the middle class and upper class, and so forth. I mean, maybe because they control more wealth, maybe because they took up more a larger portion of the American pie. So that's why to me, I'll rather looking at gauge an economy performance based on the poverty level, right? Based on the people who's on the food stamps. So to me, those economic indicators are the true indicator of performance, as opposed to all these relatively abstract GNP, GDP, and so forth. Because what they really reveal, like I said, is really the performance upper class, and we all know the upper class will always, regardless of economic conditions, will always uh, thrive. So that's why I don't really rely on those indicators as a measurement of the economy. Like, for example, perfect example. Speaking of China, right? People look at China and say, "Wow, they have a staggering growth," right? But you guys, I don't. I'm pretty sure you guys already knew about this. China's wealth disparities. You think America's bad? America is bad? China's 10 times, 100 times worse in terms of wealth disparity. So that's why the CCP right now is so nervous. That's why they have all these firewall anti-security measure in place. It's because the wealth disparity is so huge to the point where a revolt could happen anytime. That's how think about this. For 5,000 year Chinese history, that's how dynasty were changed, right? Is because when the lower class and the working class were oppressed uh, to the point of no return when they actually vote. So that's why when all these economists praising how the Chinese economic growth was staggering, early. I mean, right now it's kind of slowing down, but before that, I don't really trust that, which is true because, like I said, it does not reveal the actual economic condition of a nation. That's all I want to say.
Well, let me, for those who are listening, the stock market in reality is the playground, was originally the playground of the wealthy and business owners. All right. Now, over time, it has been opened to a much there's a much wider access to the stock market, obviously, but the opening of access to a much broader swath of society only hides the fact of what the stock market really is, the playground of the wealthy and business owners. That is why it is not indicative of the economy, which is why now we have something called leading economic indicators and lagging economic indicators. Leading economic indicators, that's really speaking towards the interests of the wealthy and the business owners. The lagging economic indicators, that's more of what Scholar Changer said. That speaks more to the average person on the street, to the masses, how they're doing and how they're living. Lagging economic indicators are those industries and those businesses that tend to feel the effects of economic change 12 to 24 months after something happens. So, when the financial and banking crisis first went down in 2007, the brunt of it was in 2007. 2008, it started to move into other sectors, and we started to see more dominoes fall. The lagging economic indicators started to feel it in 2009, 2010. So when things turned around and banks and businesses started to turn back up, and you heard every day on the news that the economy is roaring back and it's full steam ahead. It wasn't until 2011, 2012 that the lagging economic indicators turned back around. So everything Scholar Tang just said is 100% accurate, which is why I said earlier, the stock market is in no way it's not an accurate reflection of the economy. It is not.
Yeah, and Paul, I just want to also I want to add, appreciate that. I also want to add is that let's be honest here. All right, let's be honest here. You know, America. A lot of us, especially people who live in America, we all assume that America is a classless society, right? That's what a lot of us love to imagine it to be. That America is a socially mobile society where we don't have those entrenched socioeconomic stratified society like Great Britain and so forth. Well, let's be honest here. America is always is as a socially stratified as any European country, any Western country, or any country. Period.
Mm-hmm.
With it always going to be an entrenched aristocratic class. It so happen right now. What happened is that right now you have the nouveau rich, with the such as those all those athlete, all these successful athlete, all the successful celebrity. They are the nouveau rich, but the emergence of them some a lot of time blinds the fact that America has always had a entrenched gentry, uh, landed gentry aristocrat aristocratic class which can trace all the way back to the founding of this nation, such as you guys remember that the whole debate between Jeffersonian versus Madisonian, remember back in the not yeah it was Madisonian Madison was James Madison was someone who debate the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. Anyway,
Right.
the right that was just a class. That's a classical example of example of how there was from the very beginning of this nation there was
Of
already a class warfare. So
of
that's
course,
why I'm sorry. Go ahead, go Paul. What did you say?
of course there were, and there was a term for that, and it's called the blue bloods. They were called the blue bloods. They were called old money. You know, Bill Gates, when he was the richest man in the country, or one of the richest men in the world, he did not get any respect from the blue bloods, even though he had more money than half of them, because to them he was new money. He wasn't a blue blood. So you hit the nail right on the head, and we see that amongst every socioeconomic strata in this country. We see it amongst every ethnic group in this country. And that is the way humanity has been for centuries, and we're probably going to be that way for a few centuries more until we, as a species, outgrow that as a whole. Right? We naturally define these class systems. We stratify ourselves. Okay, as you said, in England, they still have lords and ladies and duke and duchess. Here in America, we don't have those terms, but we have the blue bloods. We have the old money. We have the so and so, the Johnson from Connecticut. We have the so and so from Boston and Rhode Island, and so yeah, that's something that has been hidden, but it's absolutely been a part of this country from day one. J.P. Morgan, Admiral Vanderbilt, Andrew Carnegie was looked down upon because even though at the time he was one of the richest men in the world, he was a self-made billionaire, but he was born poor. But he was looked down upon as new money.
All right, I think we're past the half hour, so what we'll do is we'll shut it down for tonight, and then we'll reconvene on Friday with economics. Thank you all for joining us, and have a good night.